She was an it girl in the Golden State.
She had a certain spunk, a certain it factor, and everybody wanted to be with her or around her. The men loved her. I mean, loved her.
Even though she clearly had a lot of admirers, you know, she was really trying to do it by herself and be really independent.
But when blood-curdling screams ring out, she's at risk of losing it all.
Mika!
He frantically started banging on her door, calling her name. We were panicked. We thought maybe there had been a kidnapping as well.
As detectives investigate, they unravel a story of obsession and betrayal.
He had a crush on her. He was infatuated with her.
Maybe he could not deal with the rejection and finally snapped.
She breaks down and admits, yes, it upset me that my husband went out with this woman.
She told him that tonight she was going to die.
Will the killer evade justice?
Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years.
We were not getting any answers, trying to figure out what had happened.
Or was the real culprit hiding in plain sight?
When he said that to me, the hair on my neck stood up.
The text comes back positive for deception.
I felt like at that moment that I could have been looking at a killer.
January 1999. It's the start of a new year in Richmond, California.
Richmond is an inner city that is located approximately 30 minutes from San Francisco and 20 minutes from Oakland.
Richmond was a working-class city with individuals that were trying to make a way for themselves and their families.
The majority of the population of Richmond were good families, good people.
But the Richmond community is also struggling with a growing crime problem.
In the 1990s, for a city that was relatively small, it was plagued by crime.
It was still suffering from the crack epidemic.
It was not uncommon to have multiple homicides on any given day.
On the morning of January 9th, one local resident, Andrew Piper, is still asleep after a relatively quiet night, until he's jolted awake by the sound of screaming.
He was sleeping on his couch, and he was awakened by blood-curdling screams from his neighbor's apartment across a shared driveway.
He knows that a young mother named Mika Wadley lives there with her 18-month-old baby.
He's afraid for their safety, so he quickly ran over there to check on them and see what's going on.
He frantically started banging on Mika's door, calling her name.
Mika!
The neighbor attempts to open the door, but it's locked.
He's continuing to hear the screams for about 30 more seconds, and then it goes silent inside.
Mika, can you hear me? Hello?
He knew that Mika was in trouble, so he returns to his own apartment, he retrieves his phone, and makes the call to 911.
I'm really concerned about my neighbor.
26-year-old Mika Wadley was beautiful inside and out.
She was real sweet, kind-hearted, easy to get along with. She was very lovable. She made you smile. She made you feel good about yourself.
She was so outgoing. She had so many friends. It was just her personality. She had a very nice personality. She got along with everybody.
She just loved being around people. She was a very people person.
But in addition to her outgoing personality, Mika also had a fiery side.
She was a little feisty. People just didn't play with her. If they did challenge her, she would be up for the challenge.
Nobody messed with her. She could back her stuff up very good.
I think you should bet more than that.
You want me to bet more?
More than that.
Mika had a certain spunk, a certain it factor, and everybody wanted to be with her or around her. The men loved her. I mean, loved her. They were just attracted to her. Her personality, her funness. She was known for putting guys in the friend zone. She knew her value and she knew her worth.
Hey, who's hungry? You!
There we go.
Thank God. I'm starving.
But when she met 22-year-old Pete Smith, he seemed like someone who was worth her time.
They were hanging out. She really, really liked him.
He had this big personality just like she did. So as you can imagine, them together, they were the life of the party.
And just a year into the relationship, it took an exciting turn.
She was like, Terry, I'm pregnant. I'm like, what? And she was like, yeah, I'm supposed to have a baby.
She was very happy when she found out she was pregnant.
I just didn't believe it at the time that she was pregnant. So she must have really been in love with this young man.
She was ready to have a child and to have a family.
But just a few months before Mika's due date, tragedy struck.
The tragedy came about by homicide, where her partner Pete was unfortunately murdered.
Pete was another casualty of the gun violence plaguing Richmond.
Later in the summer, after her partner Pete died, Mika delivered her beautiful baby girl.
Caring for a newborn wasn't easy without Pete.
So she went to a little depressed stage, and she used to cry a lot.
Why don't you let me hold the baby for a little bit? Okay.
We all just took care of her because she always gave us joy, happiness. And now we had to turn around and be that support system, for her.
One such person who became a beacon for Mika in times of need was her close friend, Cameron.
Hey, Kiki. Brought you a little something.
Thanks, Cam.
You're welcome.
Cameron was a friend of the family. Like, we knew his relatives. They actually lived down the hill from us.
She really depended on him as a person to share her life with, get advice from, and to have a friendship with.
I don't know if I can do this without Pete.
Hey, you're not alone. We got you.
Cameron was a really good support system for her. He helped her get through that tough time.
And with her loved one's support, Mika was able to push through the heartbreak and embrace the joys of motherhood.
She loved being a mom. Motherhood was the best thing that had ever happened to her.
But now, the safety of Mika and her daughter has been called into question after screams were heard from their apartment.
A neighbor called 911 after being woken up by the screaming.
I'm really concerned about my neighbor.
When officers arrive at Mika's apartment, they find her door ajar.
When you see an open door, then you know that there's trouble, there's a problem, so you have to be on guard and ready.
Is anyone here?
When they were clearing the living room area, it was obvious that there had been some type of struggle in there.
Things are all over the place, furniture is moved.
And then they find Mika.
Her hands are tied above her head, and there's a blanket covering her face.
Her underwear had also been pulled down, leading police to believe they may have been dealing with a case of sexual assault.
It's a tragic scene, but it's not a hopeless one.
The officer goes to check on her, and to his surprise, he finds out that she's still alive.
Get in your mess in here.
In January of 1999, 26-year-old single mom Mika Wadley was finding joy in motherhood.
She lost her partner, Pete, shortly after she became pregnant.
It had been a tough year for her. Her daughter was truly a light in the darkness for her.
But now Mika has been found unresponsive on the floor of her apartment after a neighbor reported the sound of screams.
Thankfully, there's still a chance to save her.
Get in your mess in here.
Paramedics responded and transported her to a local hospital.
But where is Mika's 18-month-old daughter?
There's no baby to be found.
We were panicked. We thought maybe there had been a kidnapping as well.
Fortunately, police soon learn that Mika's daughter is safe and sound with family.
She was at my grandmother's house. She was with us.
Upon hearing what's happened, Mika's sister Keela drops everything and heads straight to the hospital, where Mika is now in the ICU.
I got to the hospital and I said, "Where is she?" And he said, "Oh, they're working on her." Then I saw a glass door and you could see them working on her.
They were trying to resuscitate her, but it wasn't going well.
And then they came in the room and they said she died. And I said, "Who do you mean she did?" They said they can't tell me nothing. And that was it.
When Keela communicates the tragic news to the rest of Mika's loved ones, they're equally devastated.
A lot of questions. Is this real? When you use a child, it's hard, you know.
To hear that your best friend is dead, that was the worst day of my life. Mika was so joyful, so full of life. Who would want to do something like that to her?
Back in Mika's apartment, detectives begin trying to answer that question.
What was initially a horrific and brutal assault has now become a homicide case.
Outside the residence, investigators locate an important clue.
I noticed that there was a large window screen resting against the fence.
Is this where the perpetrator entered? Is this how the person got into the home?
Inside the apartment, it's clear Mika put up a fight with her attacker.
There's clear evidence that there's been a violent struggle here.
The couch cushions, some were laying on the floor. There was blood evidence. There was a pair of platform boots, and one was missing a black shoelace. So we automatically assumed that how the suspect bound her wrist was by removing the shoelace from Mika's shoe.
Detectives believe sexual assault was the sole motive in this crime.
Her wallet was still there. There was jewelry that was still there.
Aside from the living room where the big fight happened, the house was otherwise untouched. There wasn't anything obvious missing.
But that's not the only reason police think they can rule out robbery as a motive.
When first responders found her, she had a blanket covering her face.
In my experience, when there are homicides or sexual assaults and it's a known offender, they will often cover the victim's face, almost like they didn't want to see the person in their last seconds.
That was a sign to investigators that it was likely someone that she knew.
In their search for answers, detectives turned to the neighbor who called 911, Andrew Piper.
He knew Mika. When he learned that she had been killed, it was devastating to him.
So when you went to check on her earlier this morning, was the door locked?
Well, at first it was.
After calling 911, he walked back to Mika's apartment.
And this time, the door was open.
This was startling to the neighbor in that just moments before, this door was locked.
I thought about going to check in on her at that point, but I was afraid.
He had a little bit of remorse because despite the door being open, he chose not to go in.
Was there anyone else in the vicinity while all of this was going on?
Well, there was this one guy.
He noticed that there was a man in the distance exiting the apartment complex. He was too far away to get a good look, but he believed that he was wearing a beanie and a gray sweatshirt.
His pace and his gait didn't lend one to believe like he was running from the scene. I mean, could it just be a random person just walking toward the bus stop?
Regardless, it's the only real lead investigators have at this point.
Although the 911 caller couldn't give a really detailed description, he was able to give the officers enough to put out an APB for someone wearing a gray sweatshirt and a beanie.
Could this man be the key to unlocking the case?
Detectives in Richmond, California are investigating the death of beloved 26-year-old single mother, Mika Wadley.
Mika Wadley was murdered inside her apartment.
And the only lead they have so far is a vague one.
A neighbor saw a man he didn't recognize leaving the apartment complex after the crime took place. But the man wasn't exhibiting any suspicious behavior, so it's not clear if he had anything to do with it.
As officers continue putting feelers out for this mysterious individual, detectives receive word that the results of Mika's autopsy are in.
Her autopsy spoke volumes. Mika died in probably the most personal way that you can die. She was smothered. That takes a while to take place, and that's very painful.
But according to the autopsy, Mika wasn't sexually assaulted.
She was a firecracker, and she fought him tooth and nail until the end.
She must have fought so hard that her killer was not successful in that regard.
Detectives suspect that after the killer heard Andrew Piper knocking on the door, he knew his time was limited.
When she screamed, he had to know that someone was going to come. He had to know that if he didn't prevent Mika from being able to tell anybody who he was, he, unfortunately for Mika, had to make a decision.
So he smothered her to keep her quiet, and when he thought she was dead, he fled the scene.
But who is he? Investigators hope Mika's family can provide some insight.
Can you think of anyone who would want to attack Mika?
No, everybody loved her.
If you seen her as a person, you wouldn't think she had no enemies at all.
I just couldn't see why someone would want to take her life.
What about a boyfriend? Was she seeing anyone?
Probably in any homicide case where you have a woman who's been killed, I mean, the first person that police always look at is a boyfriend.
But she wasn't with anybody.
After her ex died, she kind of gave up on dating.
She'd just been focused on her daughter and wasn't trying to get into a relationship anytime soon.
So you can't think of anyone that she may have been out with on Friday night?
Mika's family reveals she did go out with someone that evening.
But he's just a friend.
What is his name?
Cameron King.
The detectives learned that the night before, Mika and her good friend Cameron had dropped off Mika's daughter with Mika's family so that the two of them can go see a movie.
The family tells me that he is somebody that she had known for about 6 or 7 years after meeting at a local junior college.
He was real goofy like her. They would just go to the movies and hang out, but she wasn't like attracted to him.
However, Mika's family says Cameron was clearly vying for something more.
And he definitely wanted to date her.
The way that Cameron would kind of gush around, when Mika would speak, they were pretty confident in knowing that he had a crush on her.
Oftentimes, when they were hanging out late, Mika would allow Cameron to crash on her couch, and he would leave early in the morning before she would wake up.
However, the family says a few weeks earlier, Cameron had exhibited some strange behavior.
They didn't really feel, initially anyway, that he would ever act on his feelings, except several weeks prior to Mika's homicide. Mika shared with her sisters that one night Cameron was over watching a movie, she went to bed, he was going to sleep on the couch and then let himself out.
But when she woke up in the middle of the night, she saw Cameron sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her.
Cameron, what are you doing?
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna leave. Okay. I'm sorry.
It really freaked Mika out.
Based on this unsettling information, detectives can't help but wonder if Cameron had something to do with Mika's death.
At this point, the urgency to speak to him has now increased because here we have a young woman that was found naked from the waist down and having a male friend that I was told that also was infatuated with her, that was close to her, and that may have wanted more.
Maybe he can no longer deal with the rejection and finally snapped.
In January of 1999, detectives investigating the homicide of 26-year-old single mother Mika Wadley are growing suspicious of her friend, Cameron King.
Apparently, Cameron wanted more than just a friendship from Mika, but Mika wasn't into him like that.
Cameron, what are you doing?
Maybe he can no longer deal with the rejection and finally snapped.
Investigators waste no time locating Cameron and bring him in for an interview.
We need to speak with you about your friend Mika.
What about her?
Cameron was informed that Mika was brutally murdered.
Wow, that's just too bad.
You would have expected sobbing, crying, or some shock, and that did not take place with Cameron.
You were close, right?
Yeah, we were close.
I remember sitting in the interview and being very much taken aback by this. Like, we could have been talking about, a sporting event, and it would have been the same.
Did you ever have any romantic feelings for Mika?
Nah.
He flatly denied it. He said that they were just friends and that was not an interest on his part.
Did you watch her in her sleep?
Nah.
He said, no, never happened. I never made any advances on her.
He made it appear as if she were the one that really wanted to be with him.
There was a part of me that felt that he was trying to distance himself from her romantically, given how she died. And I honestly wasn't buying it.
We believe you were the last person to see Mika before she was killed. That does not look good for you.
They asked him to walk them through what he and Mika did on Friday the 8th.
Damn, we just went to see a movie, okay?
And nothing else happened?
That's when Cameron admits that there was something odd that Mika said to him that night.
She knew she was gonna die.
According to Cameron, Mika actually brought up her impending death that night.
And I'll be honest with you, when he said that to me, like, the hair on my neck stood up.
Cam, if I died tonight, would you come to my funeral?
Come on, quit playing.
Promise me you'll come.
All right. Okay, Kiki. I promise I'll be there, okay? But you gotta stop acting so morbid, all right?
Well, did you ever ask her why she felt that way?
Not really. I just changed the subject, it kind of creeped me out.
Which is unusual. If they're such good friends, I would expect him to question, well, what's wrong? Is somebody following you? Like, why would you say that? And he didn't.
After the movie got out around 12:30 a.m., Cameron states that he dropped Mika off at her apartment.
You sure you didn't spend the night?
Not this time.
He leaves and he returns home to his apartment in Oakland, which is about 20 minutes away.
When you dropped her off, did you happen to notice one of the windows had the screen removed?
I asked him, are your fingerprints gonna be on the window? Remember, there was an open window, and his response was, no, I didn't crawl through no window. Again, another red flag, and I challenged him on it. I said, I didn't mention anybody crawling through an open window.
At this point, investigators are extremely suspicious.
But Cameron insists that he was home all night after dropping Mika off.
I dropped her off, I went straight home, got there at 1:30, didn't go anywhere. Went straight to bed. Didn't leave until 10:30 the next morning when I went to work.
Can anyone else corroborate that?
That's when Cameron drops a bombshell.
Cameron says, yes, you can ask my wife.
Cameron is not a single man. He's been in a relationship with a woman named Whitney Clark for 4 years.
She is basically his common law wife that they have a child together.
It suddenly seems extremely strange that he's going out on what seems like a date with another woman to the movies.
This really got the detective's attention because she might be a person that had a motive. Her husband was spending the night at Mika's home, taking her to movies, spending a large amount of time with her.
Investigators contact Whitney Clark, and she agrees to come into the station for an interview.
They started off by asking her if it troubled her that Cameron left her alone so that he could take another woman out to a movie.
Not really. They were just friends. I met her a time or two.
They asked her, did Cameron come home on the night of the 8th? After he took Mika to the movies, and she said yes.
She corroborates Cameron's story. She says that Cameron comes home at 1:30 a.m., gets into bed with her, they watch some TV.
Then they went to bed, and he left for work around 10:30 the next morning.
We know that her neighbor phoned the police around 7:30 a.m. after hearing her screams.
There's no way he could have had anything to do with what happened with Mika.
In her mind, he couldn't have been responsible because he was in bed with her.
You're sure?
100%.
They asked her, would you be willing to take a polygraph test? And she says yes.
The investigators hooked her up to the lie detector machine, and the examiner begins a series of questions.
But it doesn't take long for the needle to spike.
The text comes back positive for deception, that she's not telling the truth.
Richmond detectives are in the midst of interviewing Whitney Clark about the murder of 26-year-old single mother, Mika Wadley.
Her common-law husband, Cameron King, was the last person to see Mika alive before she was killed.
Whitney has denied having anything to do with Mika's murder and says she was at home with her young daughter that morning. According to Whitney, Cameron was home too. But is she telling the truth?
So, as a part of her questioning, Cameron's wife was asked to take a polygraph test that she unfortunately failed.
The two questions on which she was deemed untruthful were, are you certain Cameron came home at 1:30 a.m.? And are you covering up for your husband?
Whitney, we know you aren't being totally honest with us here.
Okay. Okay.
Whitney admits that Cameron's close relationship with Mika bothered her more than she initially let on.
She breaks down and admits, yes, it upset me that my husband went out with this woman.
In fact, she was really upset because she believed that Cameron had taken $20 from out of her pocket in order to go to the movies.
Imagine if someone used your hard-earned cash to buy another woman's movie ticket and popcorn. Right, it made my blood boil.
But Whitney maintains that Cameron did return home by 1:30 a.m.
She had stayed up until he arrived home at 1:30 in the morning because she was going to confront him about the money that he had stolen from her to take Mika out.
So after Cameron got home later that night after dropping off Mika, he and his wife had an argument.
The argument went on for a while until Cameron said he was done arguing and crawled into bed and went to sleep.
She woke at 10:30 in the morning. Cameron was in bed with her. She said, I'm a sound sleeper. I slept right through until 10:30 a.m. Well, if you were soundly asleep, how would you know if Cameron would have gotten up and left and returned home?
Mika was killed around 7:30 a.m. It's entirely possible that Cameron could have gone back to Mika's and killed her, and then snuck back into bed before his wife woke up.
After speaking with Whitney, detectives circle back around to Cameron and issue another polygraph test. Will he also show signs of deception?
During the polygraph examination, Cameron did pass some of the test questions. Questions where he works, where he lives, things of that nature.
Then, as the questions get related to the incident and more complicated, all of a sudden, he is found untruthful on two questions.
The first question is, were you present when Mika Wadley was injured? The second question was, did you have anything to do with the death of Mika Wadley?
He failed miserably on both those questions.
It's been looking more and more to investigators like they've zeroed in on their main suspect.
But Cameron insists they've got it all wrong.
When I continued to press him, he just continued to announce his innocence. I didn't do it. I was home.
You're wasting your time. I didn't do it.
All of this adding up is unsettling. His story felt very manufactured. And I felt like at that moment that I could have been looking at a killer.
Detectives take DNA and fingerprint samples from both Cameron and Whitney.
But once it's run through the lab and compared to the DNA at the crime scene, detectives are surprised to learn it was, in fact, not a match.
Are you sure?
There's no DNA from Cameron or his wife that's at the crime scene that's on Mika.
So now, they had to start from square one.
If Cameron wasn't involved, they can't rule out that this was a completely random crime.
So that was really what we were fearing, is that we had a serial rapist on our hands.
Despite the setback, investigators continue to diligently work on the case.
Our focus was still continuing to see, if not Cameron, then who? And we just continue to forge ahead and try to identify the person.
Police acquired a list of every known sex offender in the area, and they interviewed each one of them to make sure that they had a rock-solid alibi.
But their efforts prove unfruitful.
So days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and the case became cold.
So, I mean, you can imagine how difficult this would be for Mika's family.
Beside being disappointed that they may never get justice, they're also worried about their own safety.
I'm scared to go in my own house because you have that in the head. Who is it? Is it someone I know? Am I talking to this person? Like, why? Like, I could be next to them.
As time drags on, Detective Kern eventually retires. But even in retirement, Mika's case stays on her mind.
I still kept kind of one foot in the door, would still ask the cold case, hey, how are we? Where are we with this? Is there anything more we can do?
She made a promise to the family that they would catch Mika's killer, and she wanted to make good on that promise.
And in 2020, 21 years after Mika's death, a new team of investigators starts making headway with the help of recent technological advances.
DNA technology had come a long way.
Parts of the fingernail clippings and ligatures that had not been tested was tested.
The new team also takes a look at the shoelace that was wrapped around Mika's hand, and they're able to find DNA from that shoelace. That's also the DNA from a male donor. The question now is, who is the donor? Where did this DNA come from?
To be perfectly transparent, throughout the whole 20 years, I believed it was Cameron.
But the new DNA samples still aren't a match for Cameron King or his wife.
I was speechless. All roads led to Cameron, and yet it wasn't Cameron. You could have knocked me down with a feather, honestly. Like, I was taken aback, just shocked.
One of the most shocking aspects of this case are the polygraph results, which is in contrast with the physical evidence. Even though the polygraph shows signs of deception, it's hard to argue with DNA evidence.
Most people don't understand what it's like to be inside of a police room, be asked questions. It's very stressful. It's very unnerving.
And it's quite possible the stress that Cameron was feeling in the interrogation room caused him to fail the polygraph test.
But even though investigators have hit a wall with their prime suspect, they continue to push on.
They started using public DNA databases, meaning 23andMe and all the ones where you put your own information and DNA in so you could find lost relatives.
Against all odds, they get a hit, and it was someone no one ever expected.
I'm like, what? For real? I know him.
"21 years have passed since the murder of beloved single mother, Mika Wadley. But now detectives may finally have the lead they've been waiting for.
So after 20 years with the advances in technologies, detectives decided to reopen this case and to test DNA with new measures.
They started using public DNA databases, meaning 23andMe and all the ones where you put your own information and DNA in so you could find lost relatives.
Against all odds, they get a hit, and it was someone no one ever expected.
His name is Jerry Lee Henderson.
His name has never come up, not one time throughout this 20-year investigation.
Richmond Police Department contacted the family and showed a picture, and they asked, do you know the name of Jerry Lee Henderson? And at that time, they had no knowledge of anybody by that name.
And I told her I don't recognize the picture. I don't know him.
But Mika's best friend, Terry Adams, recognizes the name immediately.
Keela gave me a call and said, Terry, they found out who killed Mika. And I'm like, what? For real? And then she said it was a guy named Jerry Henderson. You know him? I'm like, yes, I know him.
Jerry Lee had attended some classes at junior college with Mika. He was kind of an acquaintance, but not anybody that she would speak of frequently.
We all went to Contra Costa College. We would just hang out, but I couldn't see the connection with Jerry and Mika because they weren't friends outside of us being all together.
Around the time Mika was killed, Jerry had been down on his luck.
He was having problems trying to have work and find a place to live. He'd actually been kicked out of his place.
He was homeless at some point.
So the million-dollar question is, why?
Why and how he ended up at her home that night.
So one theory that was put forward was that Jerry may have been coming to Mika's apartment in search of a place to stay because he had been kicked out.
So investigators believe he most likely snuck in through the window early in the morning, thinking Mika wasn't home. When he made it through the window and spotted Mika asleep, something in him must have snapped and decided he wanted more than just a place to stay.
Investigators believe he spotted her boots on the floor and quietly removed one of the shoelaces.
What are you doing? Let me go! Stop! Jerry, stop!
So he binds her wrist, and he's trying to sexually assault her.
But Mika fought back.
She's on the couch. She's pushing and she's fighting. She gave it her all.
That's why we have this evidence of this struggle. She must have fought really hard in order to make sure he wouldn't do what he was trying to do.
She bled pretty well from her defensive wounds.
All this while Mika was screaming at the top of her lungs, so loud that it woke her neighbor.
Mika!
When Jerry heard the knocks at the door, he began to panic.
He wraps her with the blanket really quick to quiet her.
But she wasn't quiet enough, so he smothered her.
Stop fighting! Shut up!
Mika fought her hardest, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to save her life.
But Mika's struggle, her fight, her tenacity prevented this perpetrator from sexually assaulting her. So if there's anything that the family can have some type of peace with, is that she was not sexually violated.
No one knows for sure if the man that Andrew Piper saw walking out of the apartment complex that day was Jerry, but it certainly seems likely.
Now that we have a name, and now that we have a DNA match, detectives want to speak to Jerry Lee Henderson.
But they find that they can't do that. They can't do that ever because Jerry Lee died 11 days after Mika's murder.
Although Jerry's cause of death was never confirmed, it appeared to be a drug overdose.
This is a bittersweet resolution that in some ways feels a little bit hollow because, we'll never be able to confront Jerry Lee Henderson and ask, why did you do this? What was your motivation?
Some of the answers we'll never have.
And unfortunately, Jerry Lee Henderson has taken that secret to his grave.
Mika's family is glad they have answers. However, a part of them still remains unconvinced.
That young man didn't do that. It don't make sense. It doesn't add up.
Jerry Henderson, he was the nicest guy. Jerry was really laid back and quiet. I just couldn't see what would do something like that.
They said he OD'd, but there ain't no drugs in his system. If you read it, that's what they said.
He didn't.
The last thing anyone remembers with certainty is painfully ordinary. A mother drove her 5 children to school on a cool spring morning in one of the wealthiest towns in America. She smiled at familiar faces. She followed the same roads she had driven countless times before. The sun had already climbed above the trees, washing the quiet streets of New Canaan, Connecticut, in soft golden light. Lawns were freshly cut. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across emerald grass. Birds drifted between maple branches as if the day had been carefully designed to promise nothing except peace. No one watching that morning could have imagined they were witnessing the final confirmed moments of Jennifer Dulos's life. She never came back. Hours later, her car would still be there. Her phone would fall silent. Friends would begin making calls that went unanswered. Children would wait for a mother who always showed up. Investigators would eventually walk into a garage where the silence itself seemed disturbed, where something invisible lingered beneath the scent of cleaning products and concrete dust. Before long, blood would tell a story that no witness could. Yet the body was gone. It is one of the oldest nightmares in criminal investigation. A person disappears. The evidence whispers violence. Every clue points toward death. But the victim cannot be found. Without a body, there is no funeral, no final goodbye, no grave where children can leave flowers. There is only an empty space, stretching through years, refusing to answer the single question that matters most. Where is Jennifer Dulos? That question has haunted investigators, prosecutors, journalists, and an entire family ever since the morning of May 24, 2019. It is a question that survives even after arrests were made, even after courtrooms filled with photographs, forensic diagrams, surveillance footage, DNA reports, phone records, and thousands upon thousands of pages of evidence. It survived the death of the man accused of orchestrating her murder. It survived convictions against others accused of helping conceal what happened. It remains unanswered today. Some crimes end with certainty. This one ends with silence. At first glance, the setting hardly seems capable of producing a mystery so dark. New Canaan is known for elegant homes hidden behind stone walls and flowering trees. Its streets are lined with carefully maintained neighborhoods where children ride bicycles without fear and neighbors wave politely as they collect their mail. It is a place where people invest in excellent schools, peaceful weekends, and the comforting belief that terrible things happen somewhere else. But appearances have always been unreliable. Behind polished front doors, marriages collapse. Financial pressure builds. Pride hardens into resentment. Control disguises itself as concern until the distinction disappears entirely. Sometimes the most dangerous conflicts unfold not in abandoned alleys or forgotten highways but inside kitchens, family courtrooms, and quiet living rooms where only 2 people truly know what has been said after everyone else has gone home. Jennifer Dulos knew that reality well. 4 years before she vanished, she had become locked in an exhausting legal battle that reached far beyond the ordinary bitterness of divorce. Court filings accumulated. Allegations multiplied. Hearings replaced conversations. Lawyers became permanent fixtures in everyday life. Every decision seemed connected to another argument waiting just around the corner. What should have been the painful ending of a marriage slowly transformed into something much larger, consuming time, money, emotional energy, and trust. Then Jennifer disappeared. The timing was impossible to ignore. Investigators quickly discovered that the disappearance was not an isolated mystery floating without context. Instead, it appeared connected to a complicated personal history filled with escalating conflict. Every document filed in family court suddenly acquired new significance. Every disagreement seemed worthy of another look. Every message exchanged between estranged spouses became another thread in a web investigators desperately tried to untangle. Still, suspicion alone has never solved a homicide. Evidence does. And this case would ultimately become one of the most remarkable examples of forensic reconstruction in modern criminal justice. There would be no eyewitness describing the fatal attack. No confession revealing every detail. No hidden recording capturing the decisive moment. Instead, detectives would be forced to assemble fragments so small they seemed meaningless on their own. A stain no larger than a coin. A discarded glove. A security camera mounted high above a city street. A cell phone connecting to distant towers. A vehicle moving through traffic. Plastic trash bags tossed into garbage bins under the cover of evening. Each discovery appeared insignificant until another piece emerged beside it. Slowly, painstakingly, investigators began building a timeline not from dramatic revelations but from ordinary objects people overlook every single day. Modern investigations rarely hinge on one spectacular breakthrough. More often they depend on thousands of quiet observations assembled with relentless patience until coincidence becomes impossibility. This investigation would test every limit of that process. Because someone had clearly invested enormous effort into making Jennifer disappear. Not simply disappear from sight. Disappear from evidence. Disappear from certainty. Disappear from history itself. Whoever was responsible seemed to understand something frighteningly simple. A missing body complicates everything. It delays conclusions. It creates opportunities for doubt. It leaves families suspended between hope and grief, trapped in a place where neither emotion can fully exist without betraying the other. Hope can become torture. Grief can feel unfinished. Jennifer's 5 children would grow older while carrying both. Every birthday, every graduation, every family milestone would quietly remind them of the empty chair no one could fill. They would not know where their mother rested. They would not have a place to visit when memory became too heavy to carry alone. Instead, they inherited questions. Questions that seemed to multiply rather than disappear. If Jennifer never left voluntarily, what happened inside her home? If someone attacked her, why was there no body? If someone cleaned the scene, what had they overlooked? If evidence had been discarded, where? And perhaps most haunting of all, how long had someone been preparing for the moment that changed everything? Investigators would eventually come to believe this was not an impulsive act born from a sudden argument. The pattern they uncovered suggested planning, movement, coordination, and deliberate efforts to erase traces before anyone realized Jennifer was missing. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as intended remains impossible to know. Criminal plans rarely survive contact with reality. Mistakes happen. Timelines shift. Panic interrupts preparation. Fortunately for detectives, perfection is almost never achieved. Every attempt to erase evidence leaves behind another opportunity to discover it. The challenge lies in recognizing those opportunities before they disappear forever. As days turned into weeks, the search expanded. Officers examined wooded areas, rivers, construction sites, and remote properties. Search teams followed leads that promised answers but produced only more uncertainty. Helicopters surveyed landscapes from above while investigators searched below. Volunteers hoped for miracles. Detectives expected evidence. Neither found Jennifer. Public attention intensified. News broadcasts replayed Jennifer's smiling photographs beside images of police tape and flashing emergency lights. Reporters stood outside courthouses delivering updates that often raised more questions than they answered. Viewers across the country watched a mystery unfold in real time, trying to understand how a woman could vanish so completely from one of the most closely monitored regions in the United States. But cameras only capture what passes before them. They cannot reveal intention. They cannot expose fear. They cannot explain the final thoughts of someone driving home after dropping children at school, believing the rest of the morning would unfold like every other Friday. Somewhere between that ordinary school run and the unanswered phone calls later that afternoon, Jennifer's story crossed an invisible line. On one side existed routine, responsibility, and motherhood. On the other lay an investigation that would consume years, devastate lives, and become one of the most discussed no-body homicide cases in recent American history. The tragedy is not defined only by violence. It is defined by absence. An absent mother. An absent body. An absent confession. An absent ending. Even after investigators pieced together a compelling sequence of events through science, surveillance, and relentless detective work, one final chapter refused to reveal itself. There remains a place somewhere, known perhaps only to the person who carried the secret to his grave, where Jennifer Dulos has never been found. And until that final mystery is answered, the story cannot truly end. It can only begin where every unforgettable true crime story begins, with an ordinary morning, an extraordinary silence, and a question that refuses to let go. Where did Jennifer Dulos go, and who worked so hard to make sure the world would never know? The first hours after a disappearance are often deceptively calm. Phones ring without urgency. Messages are sent with the quiet confidence that they will soon be answered. A missed appointment is explained away by traffic. An unanswered text becomes a dead battery. Friends reassure one another that everything will make sense in another hour or two. Life is full of harmless delays, and most of them end with an apology and a laugh. This was not one of those days. As the afternoon unfolded, concern spread in small, almost invisible waves. Jennifer was known for structure. She lived by schedules, especially when it came to her children. Every pickup, every school event, every phone call was carefully woven into the rhythm of family life. She was not someone who simply disappeared without warning. The silence surrounding her grew heavier with every passing minute because it did not belong to the woman everyone knew. Somewhere, something had interrupted that rhythm. By evening, what began as worry was becoming something far more unsettling. Law enforcement would soon find themselves standing inside a home that appeared ordinary enough from the outside. The property rested in a quiet neighborhood where large houses sat behind trees that offered privacy more than protection. Nothing about the street suggested violence. No shattered windows. No frantic neighbors gathered on sidewalks. No obvious signs of chaos. Yet experienced investigators know that homes often tell their stories in whispers rather than screams. A chair positioned just slightly wrong. A door left open when it should have been locked. A towel damp from recent use. A surface that appears cleaner than everything around it. Crime scenes are not always defined by what is present. Sometimes they are defined by what someone desperately tried to erase. Long before forensic laboratories produce reports, detectives begin asking simpler questions. What belongs here? What does not? What has changed? Those questions would eventually expose a chain of events that no amount of cleaning could completely hide. Blood has an extraordinary memory. Even after someone wipes a floor, scrubs concrete, changes clothing, or removes furniture, blood often leaves behind microscopic traces invisible to the naked eye. Modern forensic science has transformed those invisible remnants into silent witnesses. Molecules become testimony. DNA becomes identity. Tiny droplets become maps of movement and violence. Whoever believed Jennifer's story could be erased underestimated that reality. Investigators would later describe evidence suggesting that a violent assault had taken place inside the garage. Not a minor injury. Not an accident. The quantity of blood indicated catastrophic trauma, enough to convince experts that survival would have been extraordinarily unlikely without immediate medical intervention. Yet no emergency call had been placed. No ambulance arrived. No hospital admitted an unidentified patient. Instead, there was only absence. The contrast between those facts creates one of the most chilling aspects of this case. Massive blood loss tells investigators someone suffered immensely. The lack of any attempt to seek medical help tells an equally important story. Together, they point toward intent rather than panic. Intent changes everything. It transforms an unexplained disappearance into something investigators approach with an entirely different mindset. The search was no longer simply about locating a missing woman. It was about identifying the person who had every reason to make sure she would never be found. As investigators widened their focus beyond Jennifer's home, another reality emerged. This was not a mystery unfolding inside a vacuum. There was history. Years of history. Relationships leave evidence long before crimes occur. Emails. Court documents. Financial records. Custody hearings. Witness statements. Friends remember conversations that once seemed ordinary. Relatives recall arguments they assumed would eventually fade. Lawyers preserve documents that suddenly acquire entirely new meaning after violence enters the picture. Every relationship tells two stories. The one people show the world, and the one hidden behind closed doors. By the time Jennifer disappeared, her marriage had already become the subject of an exhausting legal conflict. Divorce had not brought distance. Instead, it seemed to intensify every disagreement. Decisions about children became legal battles. Financial disputes became courtroom arguments. Allegations demanded responses. Responses generated new allegations. Conflict developed its own momentum. For investigators, understanding that history mattered because homicide rarely appears without context. While no difficult marriage predicts violence, detectives are trained to examine escalating patterns. Control. Resentment. Financial pressure. Fear of losing children. Public humiliation. Personal pride. These factors do not prove guilt. But they often explain motive. And motive provides investigators with direction. Still, direction alone cannot sustain a criminal prosecution. Jurors expect evidence. Evidence that survives scrutiny. Evidence that cannot simply be dismissed as coincidence. That standard would become especially important in Jennifer's case because the central piece of evidence, the victim herself, remained missing. No body. No autopsy. No officially documented cause of death. To many people outside the legal profession, that sounds almost impossible to overcome. Popular culture has long suggested that murder cases require a recovered body before justice can move forward. Reality is different. Courts do not require absolute certainty. They require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are not the same thing. Investigators understood from the beginning that if Jennifer's remains were never found, every remaining piece of evidence would have to carry additional weight. Every forensic finding would matter more. Every surveillance image would be examined frame by frame. Every electronic record would become another building block supporting an invisible structure. If one piece failed, others would have to remain standing. That is why this investigation became so painstaking. Nothing could be assumed. Nothing could be overlooked. Even the smallest inconsistency demanded attention. Meanwhile, outside the investigation, another tragedy unfolded quietly, one that rarely receives the same attention as forensic evidence or courtroom arguments. 5 children were living through uncertainty no child should ever experience. Children understand absence long before they understand crime. They notice missing hugs, empty seats at dinner, birthdays without familiar voices, questions adults refuse to answer because there are no answers to give. For them, time moves differently. Days feel endless. Weeks become confusing. Eventually, the calendar continues moving forward even while emotionally everything seems frozen in place. Every missing person leaves behind more than an investigation. They leave unfinished conversations. Half-read books. Favorite coffee mugs. Clothes waiting in closets. Voicemail greetings that loved ones hesitate to delete. The ordinary objects become extraordinary because they are suddenly all that remains. Jennifer's disappearance transformed everyday memories into priceless ones. A routine school drop-off became the final confirmed goodbye. A parked vehicle became a landmark in an unfolding mystery. Ordinary household spaces became scenes investigators would examine inch by inch, searching for fragments capable of speaking on behalf of someone who no longer could. And somewhere beyond public view, another struggle had already begun. The struggle between truth and concealment. Every criminal investigation can be understood as a race. One side works to hide. The other works to reveal. One attempts to erase timelines. The other reconstructs them. One scatters evidence. The other gathers it. The outcome depends not on who moves faster, but on who overlooks less. In the days ahead, detectives would discover that someone had apparently gone to extraordinary lengths to dispose of incriminating materials far away from the original crime scene. Instead of abandoning everything in one location, evidence appeared to have been distributed across multiple public trash receptacles, a method that suggested planning rather than impulse. At first glance, such a strategy might seem effective. After all, garbage disappears every day. Collection trucks empty containers before dawn. Landfills swallow thousands of tons of waste. Objects vanish beneath mountains of refuse, never to be seen again. Unless investigators know exactly where to look. Modern cities are filled with silent observers. Traffic cameras. Commercial security systems. Municipal surveillance. Private doorbell cameras. Gas stations. Parking lots. Intersections. Every ordinary drive leaves behind digital footprints that people rarely notice until detectives begin retracing someone's movements minute by minute. Technology has changed criminal investigations forever. The question is no longer simply whether someone committed a crime. The question becomes how many electronic witnesses observed pieces of it without anyone realizing. Before this story reached a courtroom, before prosecutors presented charts connecting timelines and DNA profiles, before defense attorneys challenged every interpretation of the evidence, investigators faced an overwhelming puzzle. Thousands of facts. Hundreds of interviews. Dozens of locations. Countless hours of video. Most of it appeared meaningless in isolation. Yet somewhere inside that mountain of information existed a complete story waiting to be reconstructed. Not perfectly. Perhaps never perfectly. But accurately enough that silence itself could become evidence. Because sometimes the loudest testimony in a homicide investigation comes from what never happened. Jennifer never answered another phone call. She never withdrew money. She never contacted friends. She never returned to collect her belongings. She never came home to the children who remained at the center of her world. Lives do not simply stop without explanation. Someone, somewhere, knew exactly why hers did. And as investigators would soon discover, that knowledge had not disappeared. It had merely been buried beneath lies, calculated movements, and the mistaken belief that careful planning could outrun the patient, methodical work of forensic science. The search for Jennifer Dulos was about to become something much larger than a missing person investigation. It was becoming a relentless pursuit of a truth that someone had worked extraordinarily hard to erase. There is an uncomfortable truth at the heart of nearly every unforgettable criminal case. The act of violence itself is often measured in minutes. The consequences are measured in years. A single morning can fracture dozens of lives, sending families, investigators, lawyers, journalists, and entire communities onto paths they never imagined they would walk. For Jennifer Dulos, the violence investigators believe occurred inside a quiet suburban garage lasted only a brief moment in time. Everything that followed has stretched across years, leaving behind questions that still refuse to fade. This is not simply the story of a missing woman. It is the story of how modern forensic science attempted to speak for someone whose voice had been silenced. It is the story of how technology remembered movements that human memory could not. It is the story of a family court battle that did not end when legal papers were filed, but instead cast a long shadow over everything that followed. Most of all, it is the story of absence. Absence has a strange way of changing the people left behind. At first, absence feels temporary. A loved one is late. Their phone is off. Maybe they needed time alone. Maybe they forgot to charge their battery. The mind searches desperately for ordinary explanations because ordinary explanations are comforting. They preserve the world as it was only moments before. But with each passing hour, ordinary possibilities begin to disappear. The silence grows heavier. The unanswered questions become sharper. Eventually, hope and fear begin existing side by side, neither strong enough to overcome the other. That emotional limbo would come to define the earliest days of Jennifer's disappearance. While investigators searched for physical evidence, another search unfolded inside the minds of everyone who knew her. Friends replayed recent conversations, wondering whether they had missed signs of danger. Family members examined old memories through an entirely different lens. Casual remarks that once seemed insignificant suddenly carried unsettling weight. People who had never imagined becoming part of a homicide investigation found themselves revisiting months and even years of ordinary life, searching for the moment when ordinary quietly became extraordinary. That is one of the cruelest effects of violent crime. It reaches backward as much as it reaches forward. The past is rewritten. Memories become evidence. Conversations become clues. Silences become suspicious. Yet even as speculation spread through neighborhoods and headlines multiplied across national media, investigators remained bound by a simple principle. Suspicion is not proof. Public opinion is not evidence. Every conclusion must be supported by facts that can withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. Those facts would not emerge all at once. They would appear slowly, almost reluctantly, each one adding another layer to a puzzle that seemed determined to resist completion. A camera would reveal one movement. A laboratory would identify one DNA profile. A cell phone would establish one location. A vehicle's electronic data would fill another gap in the timeline. Piece by piece, investigators would begin assembling a narrative that no single witness could have described. Ironically, the person whose story mattered most could no longer tell it herself. Instead, the evidence would have to speak. Concrete floors. Vehicle tires. Plastic bags. Discarded clothing. Electronic records. Invisible traces of blood. These silent witnesses do not lie, but they also do not explain themselves. They require interpretation, patience, and extraordinary care. Every conclusion drawn from forensic evidence must be supported by science rather than assumption. That is why the investigation into Jennifer's disappearance became so meticulous. Detectives understood that every claim would eventually face intense examination in court. Every mistake would be magnified. Every unanswered question would become an opportunity for doubt. The challenge was enormous. The victim was missing. The man prosecutors would later accuse of orchestrating the crime would never stand trial. The case depended almost entirely on circumstantial and forensic evidence carefully woven together into a coherent sequence of events. To some people, the phrase circumstantial evidence sounds weak. In reality, many of the strongest criminal convictions are built upon it. Imagine standing outside after a storm. You may not have watched the rain fall, yet the soaked pavement, dripping trees, dark clouds, and puddles across the road allow you to reach a reasonable conclusion. No single observation proves it rained. Together, they form a picture that becomes increasingly difficult to deny. Investigators believed Jennifer's case worked in much the same way. No witness observed the fatal assault. No recovered body established the exact cause of death. No confession explained every decision that followed. Instead, dozens of independent facts gradually aligned until they appeared to tell one consistent story. Whether that story reflected the complete truth would become one of the defining questions surrounding the investigation. It is also what makes this case so compelling. Unlike mysteries solved by one dramatic confession or a forgotten fingerprint, this investigation unfolded through persistence. Detectives spent months reconstructing movements measured in minutes. Analysts reviewed surveillance footage repeatedly, searching not for dramatic revelations but for tiny consistencies. Specialists compared timestamps, locations, and forensic findings until isolated facts became connected events. It was painstaking work. Often repetitive. Sometimes frustrating. Always necessary. Because somewhere within those countless details lay the answer to a question that Jennifer's children deserved to know. What happened to their mother? Even today, despite years of investigation and multiple court proceedings, one heartbreaking reality remains unchanged. Jennifer Dulos has never been found. No memorial can replace that absence. No conviction can erase it. No legal victory can tell investigators where her remains were taken. The earth still holds that secret. Or perhaps the secret died with the man accused of carrying it. That uncertainty gives this case a unique emotional weight. Justice and closure are often spoken of as though they are the same thing. They are not. Justice belongs to the legal system. Closure belongs to the human heart. One can exist without the other. In this story, that distinction matters. As we move deeper into the events that led to Jennifer's disappearance, it is important to remember that behind every court filing, every DNA report, every surveillance image, and every headline stood a real woman whose life extended far beyond the tragedy that would ultimately define public memory. Before she became the subject of one of America's most closely watched no-body homicide investigations, she was a daughter, a writer, a friend, and above all, a mother whose world revolved around her 5 children. Understanding that life is essential. Because only by understanding who Jennifer was can we fully appreciate what was taken away on that quiet Friday morning in May. And that is where our story truly begins. Before the courtrooms, before the investigators, before the blood evidence and the discarded trash bags, there was a woman building a life she hoped would be defined not by conflict, but by love, creativity, and the everyday moments she shared with her children. Those moments, so ordinary at the time, would later become priceless memories. In the next chapter, we leave behind the mystery for a moment and step into Jennifer's world, where the portrait of the victim reveals not only the person at the center of this case, but also everything that was lost when she vanished. Before Jennifer Dulos became the center of one of the most haunting missing person investigations in recent American history, she lived a life that looked remarkably ordinary from the outside. That ordinary life is easy to overlook once a case becomes consumed by courtroom testimony, forensic reports, and endless speculation. Yet every headline that would eventually carry her name represented the loss of a real person whose identity extended far beyond the circumstances of her disappearance. To understand why this case resonated so deeply across the country, it is necessary to step away from the crime scene and return to the years before fear replaced routine. Jennifer was, in many ways, someone who found comfort in ideas rather than attention. She enjoyed writing, reading, and creating a home where curiosity mattered. Those who knew her often described a woman who invested herself deeply in her children, someone whose daily decisions revolved around providing them with stability, education, and a sense of security. Her calendar was rarely about herself. It was filled with school schedules, family responsibilities, appointments, and the countless invisible tasks that quietly define parenthood. The routines of motherhood rarely make headlines. Packing lunches before sunrise. Remembering birthdays. Helping with homework. Driving children from one activity to another. Listening carefully after difficult days at school. These moments seem almost invisible while they are happening, but when a parent suddenly disappears, they become impossible to replace. Jennifer's world centered on those routines. She was raising 5 children, each at a different stage of childhood, each carrying unique personalities and different needs. Managing a household of that size demanded patience, organization, and emotional endurance. Every morning began with movement. Breakfasts needed preparing. Backpacks had to be checked. Shoes inevitably went missing at the worst possible moment. Someone remembered a school project just before leaving the house. Another child needed reassurance before a test. Like millions of parents, Jennifer navigated these ordinary challenges one day at a time. From the outside, her neighborhood reflected an image of comfort and success. New Canaan, Connecticut, is known for elegant homes, winding roads shaded by mature trees, and neighborhoods where privacy is almost expected. Historic stone walls divide large properties. During spring, flowering trees soften the landscape with shades of white and pink. On quiet mornings, the sounds of lawn equipment drift across carefully maintained gardens while commuters begin the journey toward nearby cities. It is the kind of community many families dream about. Safe. Orderly. Predictable. Places like this often create an illusion that danger belongs somewhere else. Yet homes are private worlds. Beautiful architecture cannot reveal what happens after the front door closes. A manicured lawn cannot explain the emotional distance between 2 people. The silence of an affluent neighborhood can sometimes hide conflict just as effectively as any isolated cabin deep in the wilderness. Jennifer's marriage to Fotis Dulos had once represented hope for a shared future. Like many couples, they began with plans that likely seemed full of possibility. Together they built a family, welcomed children into their lives, and appeared to outsiders to have achieved the picture of success. Time, however, has a way of exposing differences that optimism often conceals. Relationships rarely collapse overnight. More often, they erode gradually. Small disagreements become recurring arguments. Compromises become harder to reach. Resentment settles quietly into everyday conversations. Eventually, two people may still occupy the same home while emotionally living in completely different worlds. By the time Jennifer sought a divorce in 2017, the marriage had entered a prolonged legal conflict. The separation did not bring peace. Instead, it marked the beginning of an exhausting chapter defined by court filings, legal negotiations, and disputes over the future of their family. At the center of those disputes were the 5 children both parents loved, but whose lives had become intertwined with an increasingly complicated legal process. Family court rarely resembles the dramatic confrontations portrayed in movies. Its conflicts are quieter. Documents replace arguments. Affidavits replace conversations. Lawyers speak where spouses once did. Every hearing addresses practical questions, yet beneath every legal motion lies something deeply emotional. Parents worry about losing time with their children. Financial decisions become deeply personal. Old wounds resurface repeatedly because every unresolved disagreement has the potential to influence the next hearing. For Jennifer, those proceedings became part of everyday life. Court dates interrupted routines. Legal strategy became unavoidable. The emotional weight of uncertainty lingered long after each hearing concluded. Even so, daily responsibilities continued. Children still needed breakfast. Homework still had to be completed. Life insisted on moving forward regardless of what happened inside a courtroom. Friends would later describe Jennifer as someone focused on protecting her children and creating as much normalcy as possible despite the ongoing legal battle. That effort required remarkable emotional discipline. Children are often more perceptive than adults realize. They notice changes in tone. They recognize tension even when conversations stop the moment they enter a room. Parents frequently carry enormous emotional burdens simply to prevent those burdens from becoming their children's. Jennifer appeared determined to preserve that sense of normal life. School mornings remained school mornings. Family traditions continued whenever possible. Ordinary routines became quiet acts of resilience. Looking back after her disappearance, those routines take on an entirely different meaning. What once seemed repetitive now appears precious. Every school drop-off represented time she chose to spend with her children. Every shared meal became another memory they would later treasure. Every ordinary day became one less day they would ever have together. That is one of the deepest tragedies hidden beneath the legal documents and forensic evidence. The case is often remembered for its complexity, yet complexity should never overshadow humanity. Jennifer was not merely a name inside a criminal investigation. She was the person whose absence transformed 5 children's lives forever. The legal conflict surrounding the divorce inevitably drew attention, but it should not define her entire identity. Like anyone else, Jennifer's life contained ambitions, friendships, routines, disappointments, and moments of joy that existed independently of the circumstances that would later dominate public discussion. The investigation would eventually focus on timelines, evidence, and motive. Before any of those questions existed, there was simply a woman trying to navigate the difficult reality of rebuilding life after a marriage had broken apart. She could not have known that every ordinary decision she made during those months would later be examined in extraordinary detail. Investigators would reconstruct her schedule. Journalists would revisit her final known movements. Attorneys would scrutinize seemingly routine events inside courtrooms. The ordinary would become evidence. That transformation is almost impossible to imagine while living through everyday life. None of us expect that an ordinary Friday morning, a familiar drive, or a simple family routine might someday become the opening chapter of a national true crime story. For Jennifer, that ordinary life was still continuing. At least, it appeared to be. Beneath the surface, however, tensions remained unresolved. The legal battle had not reached its conclusion, and every passing month seemed to deepen the emotional and practical divide separating two people who had once imagined growing old together. Neither friends nor neighbors could fully see what the future held. They saw school pickups. They saw familiar vehicles entering quiet driveways. They saw another family navigating divorce. What they could not see was that history was moving toward a morning that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to Jennifer Dulos. Divorce is often described as the end of a marriage, but for many families it is not an ending at all. It is a transition into a different kind of relationship, one shaped by legal obligations, shared responsibilities, and difficult compromises. For some, that transition gradually settles into a workable routine. For others, every new agreement becomes the beginning of another disagreement. By 2019, Jennifer's life had become a careful balancing act between protecting her children from adult conflict and navigating a legal process that showed no sign of ending quickly. Court hearings came and went. Attorneys prepared new filings. Decisions about custody and parenting schedules carried enormous emotional weight because they influenced not only the present, but the future each parent imagined for their family. While legal documents tend to reduce lives to dates, motions, and sworn statements, everyday life continued outside the courthouse. Morning sunlight still poured through the windows of Jennifer's home. Laundry accumulated in baskets. School calendars filled the refrigerator. Books rested on bedside tables waiting to be finished. The sounds of children moving through the house transformed quiet rooms into living spaces. These ordinary details matter because they remind us that criminal cases do not begin inside police reports. They begin inside real homes where people continue believing that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Jennifer's house reflected that hope. Friends remembered someone who remained deeply involved in her children's education and daily routines. Even amid the strain of ongoing litigation, she worked to create consistency. Children thrive on predictability, especially when the adults around them are navigating uncertainty. A familiar breakfast, a ride to school, an evening spent helping with homework, small rituals become anchors during turbulent times. Perhaps without fully realizing it, Jennifer was building those anchors every single day. The emotional demands of parenting 5 children would have been considerable under any circumstances. Combined with the pressure of a contested divorce, they required extraordinary resilience. Every parent eventually learns that children observe far more than adults intend. They notice forced smiles. They hear whispered conversations from the next room. They recognize tension hidden beneath polite words. Protecting children often means carrying burdens they never see. Jennifer appeared determined to do exactly that. Meanwhile, outside the family home, life in New Canaan unfolded with its familiar rhythm. Cafes filled with morning customers. School buses followed established routes. Dog walkers greeted one another on quiet sidewalks lined with flowering trees. The town projected stability, the comforting image of a community where neighbors knew one another and routines rarely changed. Yet communities often experience tragedy as spectators. People wave politely across driveways without knowing the private struggles unfolding behind nearby doors. The contrast between public normalcy and private conflict is one of the defining characteristics of many true crime cases. Human beings are remarkably skilled at presenting calm to the outside world while wrestling with turmoil in private. That contrast does not necessarily indicate deception. Sometimes it simply reflects survival. Most people continue working, shopping, attending school events, and smiling at neighbors even while enduring profound personal hardship. Jennifer was no exception. She continued moving forward because 5 children depended on her ability to do so. There is a quiet strength in that kind of perseverance. It rarely receives recognition because it looks so ordinary. Only after someone is gone do those ordinary acts reveal their extraordinary importance. Years later, investigators, prosecutors, journalists, and the public would reconstruct Jennifer's final weeks in remarkable detail. Phone records would establish communication. Calendar entries would define routine. Witnesses would remember conversations that seemed insignificant at the time. Every fragment of ordinary life became another piece of an increasingly complex picture. Memory itself changed. A casual exchange suddenly mattered. A scheduled appointment acquired new significance. The final confirmed school drop-off became one of the most important moments in the entire investigation. Hindsight has a way of assigning meaning that nobody could have recognized in real time. No parent loading children into a vehicle on a spring morning imagines they are creating the final ordinary memory their family will ever share. That is precisely what makes this story so heartbreaking. Nothing about the beginning of Jennifer's final day appeared extraordinary. There were no obvious warnings visible to strangers. No dramatic confrontation witnessed by neighbors. No public scene hinting that violence was approaching. The day began with routine. Routine has a comforting rhythm because it convinces us tomorrow is predictable. We wake at familiar times. We drive familiar roads. We greet familiar faces. The repetition creates a sense of permanence that tragedy can shatter in an instant. For Jennifer, Friday, May 24, 2019, began much like countless Fridays before it. Spring had settled comfortably over Connecticut. Trees had regained their leaves after winter's retreat, and neighborhoods displayed the fresh colors that arrive with warmer weather. Families prepared for the approaching Memorial Day weekend. Schools anticipated the final stretch before summer break. Many people were already thinking ahead to barbecues, vacations, or a few extra days away from work. Jennifer's attention, however, remained where it usually did. On her children. She drove them to school, following a route she knew by heart. Every turn, every intersection, every familiar landmark blended into another ordinary morning. Children climbed out of the vehicle carrying backpacks, lunches, and plans for the day ahead. Like countless school mornings before, there was every reason to believe they would reunite with their mother later that afternoon. None of them knew they had already shared their final goodbye. There is something profoundly painful about ordinary farewells. No lingering embrace. No sense of finality. Just the assumption that another conversation will happen in a few hours. Most families never think twice about those moments. After Jennifer disappeared, they became memories that could never be repeated. As she drove away from the school, the day still appeared entirely unremarkable. Traffic moved normally. Businesses opened for another Friday. Neighbors continued with familiar routines. Somewhere ahead lay a sequence of events investigators would spend years attempting to reconstruct with scientific precision. Jennifer herself almost certainly had no idea that she was driving toward the final chapter of her life. She was returning home. A destination that should have represented safety. Instead, prosecutors would later argue that it became the location where everything changed. The transformation from ordinary mourning to extraordinary tragedy did not announce itself with sirens or screams. It happened quietly, hidden from public view, inside the privacy of a home where no independent witness was present to describe what occurred. When investigators finally arrived, they would find evidence. Not enough to answer every question, but enough to convince them that Jennifer's disappearance was no accident. The peaceful image of suburban normalcy was about to collide with a forensic investigation unlike anything New Canaan had experienced in years. The routines that had defined Jennifer's life would soon give way to timelines, laboratory analysis, surveillance footage, and an increasingly urgent search for a woman whose absence was becoming impossible to explain. In the next chapter, that ordinary Friday morning gives way to the moment where investigators believe routine ended and violence began. Looking back now, it is tempting to search Jennifer's life for a single warning sign, one unmistakable moment that foretold everything that was about to happen. Human nature encourages that instinct. We want tragedies to leave visible footprints long before they arrive because the alternative is far more unsettling. The alternative is accepting that life can appear completely ordinary until the instant it is not. The truth is rarely that simple. Lives do not unfold like mystery novels where every clue is carefully placed in advance for the reader to discover. Real life is messier. It is filled with contradictions, complicated emotions, and ordinary days that seem indistinguishable from one another until history suddenly gives one of them extraordinary significance. Jennifer's final weeks were still filled with the responsibilities that had defined so much of her adult life. Her children remained the center of her attention. School schedules, family routines, and the countless decisions required to keep a busy household functioning continued despite the emotional strain surrounding the divorce. Life demanded consistency, and she appeared determined to provide it. There is a quiet courage in choosing normalcy during periods of uncertainty. Preparing breakfast even when sleep has been difficult. Smiling at children while carrying worries they are too young to understand. Answering emails. Running errands. Planning for tomorrow despite not knowing what tomorrow will bring. These are the moments that rarely appear in criminal investigations, yet they often reveal the character of the victim more honestly than any courtroom testimony ever could. Jennifer was living a life that extended beyond legal disputes and public attention. She was a mother trying to create stability in circumstances that offered very little of it. That effort deserves to be remembered because it stands in sharp contrast to the violence investigators later believed interrupted her life. When people disappear, they are often remembered only through the lens of the crime. Their personalities slowly become secondary. Their dreams fade behind forensic evidence. Their laughter is replaced by legal arguments. Their humanity risks being overshadowed by headlines. This story should resist that tendency. Jennifer was not defined by the way her life ended. She was defined by the years she spent living it. Those who loved her did not remember DNA reports or surveillance footage. They remembered conversations around the dinner table, shared holidays, school events, ordinary afternoons, and the familiar comfort of knowing she would be there. Those memories are invisible inside case files, yet they represent the greatest loss created by her disappearance. For her children, the tragedy was never abstract. It was deeply personal. Every milestone reached without their mother became another reminder that time continues moving even when grief refuses to. Every birthday carried an empty place. Every holiday contained an absence impossible to ignore. The legal proceedings that followed would dominate national attention, but they could never restore the countless ordinary moments that disappeared alongside Jennifer. That reality gives this case an emotional depth that extends beyond questions of guilt or innocence. Justice matters. Truth matters. Accountability matters. But none of them can return the years stolen from a family. As investigators would eventually discover, the physical evidence pointed toward an act of violence. The legal system would later examine whether that evidence proved criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Yet beneath every scientific conclusion remained a much simpler truth. 5 children lost their mother. Nothing that happened afterward could change that. It is also important to recognize what this case represents within the broader history of criminal investigations. Cases without recovered remains present extraordinary challenges. Investigators cannot rely upon many of the traditional forms of evidence available in other homicide cases. Instead, they must reconstruct events through countless independent pieces of information, each one carrying a small part of a much larger story. That process demands patience. It demands discipline. Most of all, it demands respect for facts. Speculation naturally surrounds high-profile investigations, particularly when so many questions remain unanswered. Rumors spread quickly. Theories multiply. Public imagination often races ahead of available evidence. Responsible investigators cannot afford that luxury. They must separate what is known from what is merely suspected, building each conclusion upon evidence capable of surviving careful examination. That distinction would shape every stage of Jennifer's case. There would be moments that appeared dramatic. There would be revelations that captured national headlines. There would also be long periods of painstaking forensic work hidden from public view, where scientists, detectives, and prosecutors assembled a case piece by piece with remarkable precision. Those quiet efforts would eventually become just as important as the discoveries themselves. Because truth is rarely uncovered through dramatic breakthroughs alone. More often, it emerges through persistence. One report confirms another. One timeline supports another. One fragment of evidence quietly strengthens the next. Eventually, what once appeared uncertain begins to form a coherent picture. That picture would forever alter the course of this investigation. As this story moves forward, the atmosphere changes. The peaceful neighborhoods of New Canaan remain the same. The tree-lined streets still appear untouched. Morning sunlight continues to fall across driveways and gardens exactly as it did before. But beneath that familiar landscape, investigators believe a devastating crime had already occurred. The ordinary world carried on without realizing that one of its residents had vanished. Neighbors mowed their lawns. Children finished another day at school. Stores closed for the evening. Families gathered for dinner. Meanwhile, concern surrounding Jennifer was growing with every unanswered call and every passing hour. Soon, that concern would become alarm. Alarm would become investigation. Investigation would become one of the most complex no-body homicide cases in recent American history. Everything we have explored so far represents the calm before that transformation. We have met the woman whose life stood at the center of this story. We have seen the routines she fought to preserve. We have understood the environment in which she lived and the responsibilities that shaped her days. Now the narrative leaves behind the world Jennifer worked so hard to maintain. The ordinary morning is over. The unanswered questions are about to begin. The next chapter follows the final known hours of May 24, 2019, a day that started like countless others but would end with an entire community searching for a mother who never returned home. It is here that routine gives way to mystery, and where every minute begins to matter. Every victim has two stories. The first is the story the world learns after tragedy strikes. It is built from newspaper headlines, courtroom testimony, forensic reports, and television interviews. It is the version preserved inside legal archives, where dates and evidence replace birthdays and dreams. The second story is the one that matters far more. It is the life that existed before strangers learned the person's name. Jennifer Dulos deserves to be remembered through that second story. Long before investigators examined bloodstains or surveillance footage, she was simply Jennifer. To the people who loved her, she was not a case file or a headline. She was the familiar voice answering the phone. She was the mother waiting outside school. She was the friend who listened carefully before offering advice. She was someone whose identity had been built over decades through countless ordinary moments that never attracted public attention because they were never meant to. That is the quiet tragedy of violent crime. It has a way of reducing an entire life to its final chapter. Jennifer's life was much larger than that. She possessed the kind of curiosity that often reveals itself through books. Writing appealed to her not because it promised recognition, but because it offered a way to organize thoughts, emotions, and observations about the world. People who spend time writing usually spend even more time thinking. They notice details others overlook. They search for meaning inside ordinary experiences. They appreciate silence rather than fear it. Those qualities also shaped the way she approached motherhood. Parenting is often described as a series of grand sacrifices, but in reality it is built from thousands of small decisions made every single day. Choosing patience when exhausted. Listening when there are countless other responsibilities waiting. Remembering favorite meals, forgotten assignments, doctor's appointments, bedtime routines, and all the invisible details that allow children to feel safe without ever realizing how much work that safety requires. Jennifer invested herself in those details. Her days were rarely centered on personal comfort. They revolved around schedules, responsibilities, and the needs of 5 growing children whose lives moved in different directions at the same time. One child might have needed help with homework while another prepared for a school event. Someone needed transportation. Someone needed encouragement. Someone simply needed their mother to sit beside them for a few quiet minutes before bedtime. To outsiders, those moments appear almost insignificant. To a family, they become the foundation of home. It is impossible to measure the value of those ordinary interactions until they suddenly disappear. Perhaps that is why Jennifer's disappearance resonated so deeply with parents across the country. They recognized pieces of their own lives inside hers. The early morning rush. The endless errands. The careful balancing of children's needs against personal exhaustion. Her routines were not extraordinary. They were deeply familiar. And familiarity has a powerful effect on public imagination. People could picture themselves driving children to school on a spring morning. They could imagine returning home expecting another ordinary day. They could imagine making plans for the weekend. What they struggled to imagine was how quickly that ordinary life could vanish. Friends described Jennifer as someone who cared deeply about creating stability for her children despite the uncertainty surrounding the divorce. Stability is a word that sounds simple until it becomes difficult to achieve. During periods of family conflict, stability requires constant effort. Children look to adults for reassurance, often without realizing they are doing so. They notice consistency. They remember traditions. They find comfort in familiar routines that tell them some parts of life remain dependable even when others feel uncertain. Jennifer appeared determined to preserve those dependable moments. Breakfast before school. Conversations during car rides. Evening routines. Family traditions. These were not dramatic acts. They were quiet expressions of love repeated day after day. Looking backward through the lens of tragedy, those routines take on extraordinary significance. The final breakfast shared together. The final school drop-off. The final ordinary conversation. No one present could have known they were creating memories that would later be revisited again and again, searching for words that suddenly carried unimaginable weight. That is one of grief's cruelest habits. It turns ordinary moments into priceless ones. It convinces us there must have been something hidden inside familiar conversations, some unnoticed clue, some sentence that should have sounded different. Most of the time, there was no clue at all. There was only life unfolding exactly as it always had until it unexpectedly stopped. Jennifer's children would one day have to reconstruct their mother through memories. They would remember not the headlines, but the person. The sound of her voice. The comfort of her presence. The routines only families understand. Those memories would become far more important than any courtroom verdict because they belonged to a world untouched by forensic evidence or legal arguments. In many ways, Jennifer's greatest legacy was not found inside the investigation that followed her disappearance. It lived inside the lives of the children she raised. Every lesson she taught. Every value she passed on. Every act of kindness she modeled. Those influences survive in ways impossible to document inside police reports. Investigators search for physical evidence because it explains crimes. Families hold on to memories because they explain lives. Both forms of truth matter. One seeks justice. The other preserves humanity. As the years passed, public attention naturally focused on the mystery surrounding Jennifer's disappearance. Television specials analyzed timelines. Experts debated forensic evidence. Court proceedings generated new headlines. Yet beneath all that public discussion remained a much quieter reality. A family continued living without someone they loved. Birthdays arrived. School years ended. Children grew older. Life continued moving forward because life always does, even when people wish it would pause. The absence, however, never disappeared. An empty chair remained empty. A missing voice remained silent. A mother never returned home. That enduring absence is what separates this case from so many others. Even after years of investigation, one essential piece of the story remains missing. Jennifer herself has never been found. Without that final discovery, every memory carries an additional burden because there is still no place where grief can fully settle. For investigators, the unanswered question became where she was taken. For her children, the unanswered question was far simpler. Why didn't Mom come home? No forensic report can fully answer that. No legal proceeding can erase it. Those questions linger because they belong not to the courtroom, but to the heart. Understanding Jennifer as a person rather than simply a victim is essential before stepping into the darkest chapter of this story. The violence investigators believe occurred did not happen to an anonymous name inside a file. It happened to a woman whose days had been filled with ordinary acts of love, whose future plans centered on her children, and whose absence would leave wounds that no verdict could ever completely heal. The story now reaches the morning of May 24, 2019. The routines Jennifer had worked so hard to preserve were about to unfold one final time. Nothing about the sunrise suggested history was waiting just beyond the next hour. Nothing about the quiet streets hinted that investigators would soon descend upon one of the most peaceful neighborhoods in Connecticut. To everyone watching from the outside, it was simply another Friday. Only later would the world understand that it was the last ordinary morning Jennifer Dulos would ever see. There is a tendency, especially in high-profile true crime cases, to remember victims only through photographs released after they disappear. A smiling portrait appears on television. A family snapshot circulates online. The same handful of images are shown so many times that they begin to replace the complexity of an entire human life. Jennifer Dulos became one of those familiar faces. Millions of people would eventually recognize her photograph. Very few would know the countless ordinary moments that photograph could never capture. A single image cannot show the thousands of bedtime stories read over the years. It cannot reveal the conversations shared during long drives home from school. It cannot capture the laughter that echoed through the house during birthdays or holidays. Photographs freeze a fraction of a second. A life is measured by everything that happens in between. Jennifer's world revolved around those moments between photographs. She was raising 5 children, a responsibility that required more than love alone. It demanded patience on difficult mornings, resilience during stressful weeks, and the willingness to place someone else's needs ahead of her own again and again. Parenthood is often defined by invisible work, the kind that leaves no certificates, no promotions, and very little public recognition. Meals appear on the table because someone planned them. School uniforms are clean because someone remembered the laundry. Appointments are kept because someone managed the calendar. Children feel secure because someone quietly carries responsibilities they are too young to notice. That invisible work was part of Jennifer's everyday life. It is easy to underestimate the emotional energy required to maintain a sense of normalcy during a prolonged divorce. Legal proceedings have a way of following people home. Court hearings end, but the uncertainty often does not. Decisions remain unresolved. New documents arrive. Another hearing is scheduled. Another disagreement emerges. Even moments meant for rest can become overshadowed by thoughts of what comes next. Yet children still need stability. They still need someone to remind them about homework, attend school events, celebrate achievements, and comfort disappointments. Jennifer appeared committed to preserving those moments for as long as she could. The home she created was more than a physical place. It was a routine, a rhythm, a sense of familiarity that children could rely upon even while other parts of life remained uncertain. That effort is perhaps most visible in the ordinary habits that later became central to the investigation. Driving the children to school was not remarkable. It was something she had done countless times before. Preparing for another busy day was not unusual. It was simply what responsible parents do. Nothing about those routines suggested they were approaching an irreversible ending. Looking back now, the simplicity of Jennifer's final morning carries enormous emotional weight. She likely thought about the rest of the day rather than the end of her life. Perhaps there were errands to complete, phone calls to return, plans for the upcoming holiday weekend. Like everyone else, she almost certainly expected tomorrow to arrive. The ordinary confidence that tomorrow exists is one of the quiet assumptions governing daily life. We schedule meetings weeks in advance. We promise to call someone later. We postpone conversations because there will always be another opportunity. Tragedy exposes how fragile that assumption truly is. Jennifer never had the chance to finish whatever plans remained on her calendar. The future she had been building ended before the day itself was over. For her children, that reality would reshape every stage of growing up. There would be graduations where one proud parent was missing. Family celebrations marked by an absence that no amount of love from others could completely fill. Questions that evolve with age. A young child may ask when their mother is coming home. An older child may ask why this happened. An adult may ask whether justice was ever truly achieved. Each question reflects a different stage of grief, Yet all of them begin with the same loss. Behind every criminal investigation exists this quieter story. The story of birthdays forever divided into before and after. The story of traditions that suddenly feel incomplete. The story of family photographs that stop including one familiar face. These consequences rarely appear in legal arguments because they cannot be measured by statutes or sentencing guidelines. They exist in memory. Memory is a remarkable thing. It preserves voices long after they fall silent. It recalls gestures, expressions, and habits that no forensic scientist could ever document. Someone remembers the way Jennifer laughed. Someone remembers the books she enjoyed reading. Someone remembers conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but later became precious simply because there would never be another. These memories are not evidence in a courtroom. They are evidence of a life. That distinction matters. True crime stories often focus so intensely on perpetrators that victims gradually disappear from their own narratives. The investigation becomes the centerpiece. The mystery overshadows the individual whose life gave rise to the mystery in the first place. Jennifer deserves more than that. She deserves to be remembered as someone whose identity was not defined by the violence investigators believe ended her life. She was a mother before she was a victim. A writer before she became a headline. A daughter and a friend before her name became associated with one of Connecticut's most closely watched criminal investigations. Holding on to that perspective changes the way we experience this story. The question is no longer only who committed the crime. The question also becomes what was taken away. Not merely a life. An entire future. Future holidays. Future conversations. Future opportunities to watch children grow into adults. Every homicide steals the years a victim would otherwise have lived. Cases involving missing victims create an additional wound because even the rituals of goodbye remain unfinished. There is no certainty. No final resting place. No moment where a family can stand together and say, "She is here." Instead, hope and grief coexist in painful tension. Hope that somehow the impossible might happen. Grief because reason quietly insists otherwise. That emotional contradiction would remain part of Jennifer's story long after investigators reached their conclusions. Even today, the absence of her remains continues to shape the way this case is remembered. The missing body is not simply an investigative challenge. It is a human one. Every unanswered question extends the mourning process for those left behind. Every passing year reinforces the reality that some mysteries refuse to surrender all of their answers. Still, one certainty remains beyond dispute. Jennifer mattered. She mattered long before the world learned her name. She mattered to the children who waited for her. She mattered to the family who searched for her. She mattered to the friends who refused to stop asking where she had gone. And she continues to matter because remembering the person behind the case is the only way to ensure that the crime never becomes more important than the life it took. With that understanding, the story now leaves behind Jennifer's portrait and moves into the final ordinary hours of May 24, 2019. The routines that had defined her life for years were about to collide with an event investigators believe had been carefully planned. By the end of that day, a mother would vanish, a community would be searching for answers, and one of the most challenging homicide investigations in recent American history would begin. The most painful part of losing someone is often not the moment they leave. It is everything that comes after. It is the empty space where a familiar voice used to exist. It is reaching for a phone before remembering there will be no answer. It is seeing a place at the table and feeling the absence before anyone says a word. For Jennifer Dulo's family, the loss was made even more difficult by uncertainty. There was no final goodbye. No opportunity to say the words people often wish they had said. No moment of peace that comes from knowing where someone is and where they can be visited. Instead, there was only a question. Where is Jennifer? That question would become the defining sentence of the years that followed, but before it became a question asked by detectives and reporters, it was a question asked by people who loved her. A family asking why. Friends asking how. Children asking when. Those questions are the emotional foundation beneath every investigation. Before detectives search for evidence, before attorneys debate legal arguments, before cameras gather outside courthouses, there are human beings trying to understand an impossible absence. Jennifer's story is powerful because it began with connection. She was not someone living on the margins of society. She was part of a community. She was a parent involved in the daily world of her children. She had relationships, responsibilities, memories, and plans. Her disappearance did not create a mystery because she was unknown. It created a mystery because she was known. People knew her routines. They knew her dedication to her children. They knew the life she had built. And because they knew her, they immediately understood that something was wrong. A person does not simply vanish from a life built around consistency without leaving questions behind. Jennifer's identity as a mother became especially significant because motherhood shaped so much of her existence. Raising 5 children meant her days were organized around other people. Her time belonged partly to them. Her attention belonged partly to them. Her decisions carried consequences far beyond herself. That is the reality of parenting. Every choice becomes connected to someone else. Where you live. How you spend your time. What risks you take. What battles you choose to fight. For Jennifer, those decisions became increasingly complicated during the final years of her marriage. The end of a relationship can be painful under any circumstances. But when children, finances, and legal disputes become involved, separation can transform from a private emotional struggle into a public legal conflict. The courtroom becomes an extension of the relationship. Every document tells a story. Every hearing represents another unresolved issue. Every decision has the potential to change the future. For parents, custody disputes are often the most emotionally intense part of that process because they involve the people they love most. Losing time with children, even temporarily, can feel devastating. The fear of separation can influence decisions and intensify disagreements. Jennifer's divorce from Fotis Dulos unfolded within that difficult environment. The legal battle surrounding their separation would later become a major focus of investigators attempting to understand motive and circumstances. But it is important to recognize the difference between conflict and crime. Many people experience painful divorces. Most do not become victims of violence. Conflict alone does not explain tragedy. Investigators must look deeper. They must examine patterns. They must determine whether circumstances changed over time and whether those changes reveal something more serious. That process requires patience because human relationships rarely fit into simple categories. A marriage can contain moments of happiness and moments of pain. A person can be successful publicly while struggling privately. A family can appear stable while facing challenges invisible to outsiders. The complexity of human relationships is precisely why criminal investigations cannot rely only on assumptions. They require evidence. And evidence, in Jennifer's case, would eventually come from places no one expected. A camera mounted above a street. A laboratory analyzing microscopic traces. A digital record preserving movements. A discarded object that someone believed no longer mattered. But before those discoveries would reshape the case, there was a final period when Jennifer was simply living her life. A mother preparing for another day. A woman navigating uncertainty. A person who had no reason to believe that ordinary routines could become the final chapter of her story. This is perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case. There was no dramatic transition between Jennifer's life and the tragedy that followed. There was no clear dividing line visible to the people around her. The world did not announce that something terrible was approaching. The morning arrived quietly. The streets remained peaceful. Children went to school. Adults went to work. Cars moved through familiar roads. The ordinary world continued functioning exactly as it always had. That is often how tragedy arrives. Not with warning, but with interruption. A single event that divides life into 2 categories. Before and after. For Jennifer's family, there would forever be a before May 24, 2019, and an after. Before was filled with ordinary memories. After was filled with questions. Before contained a future that seemed open and possible. After contained an investigation stretching across years. Before Jennifer was a person living her life. After she became the center of a mystery. Yet even as the world focused on the mystery, the person remained the most important part of the story. Jennifer's life was not valuable because she became part of a famous criminal case. Her life was valuable because she existed. Because she loved. Because she was loved. Because 5 children called her mother. The investigation that followed would attempt to explain how that life ended. But understanding who Jennifer was explains why the search mattered so much. Every detective who reviewed evidence was searching for answers on behalf of a missing woman. Every prosecutor who presented a case was representing someone who could no longer speak. Every family member who continued asking questions was fighting against the possibility that time might allow the world to forget. They refused to forget. That refusal became one of the strongest forces behind the investigation. Because when someone disappears, there are 2 battles. The first is the search for truth. The second is the battle against silence. Jennifer's loved ones faced both. They searched for information. They searched for accountability. They searched for a place where grief could finally settle. But until Jennifer is found, part of that journey remains incomplete. The unanswered question remains. The silence remains. And that silence is exactly what investigators would soon attempt to break. The next chapter moves into the final morning Jennifer Dulos was known to be alive. It begins not with chaos, but with routine, the familiar actions of a mother carrying out the responsibilities she had performed countless times before. A school drop-off. A drive home. A normal Friday morning. A morning that would become the last known chapter of Jennifer's life. The morning of May 24, 2019, did not announce itself as the beginning of a tragedy. There was no sign in the sky that something terrible was approaching. No unusual event that warned neighbors to pay closer attention. No moment that would later stand out to the people around Jennifer Dulos as the instant when the world changed. It was simply a Friday morning in New Canaan, Connecticut. The kind of morning that millions of families experience every day. A morning built around schedules. Around responsibilities. Around the familiar rhythm of getting children ready and sending them into another day. Spring had settled over Connecticut. The coldest months were behind the community, and the landscape had begun its yearly transformation. Trees that had stood bare through winter were covered again in fresh green leaves. Gardens showed the first signs of seasonal color. The streets carried the calm atmosphere that often defines suburban neighborhoods at the end of the school week. For many residents, the upcoming Memorial Day weekend represented a brief pause. A chance to rest. A chance to spend time with family. A chance to look ahead toward summer. But inside Jennifer Dulos' world, that Friday began like many others had before it. Her focus was her children. The 5 children who shaped so much of her daily life. The 5 children whose schedules, needs, and routines influenced nearly every decision she made. Like any school morning, there were likely countless small tasks that needed attention. The preparation that happens before most people even begin their workday. Making sure everyone was ready. Making sure nothing important was forgotten. Making sure the morning moved forward despite the ordinary chaos that comes with raising children. These moments are so common that people rarely stop to appreciate them. A parent checking a backpack. A child searching for something they misplaced. A final reminder before leaving the house. Small interactions that feel endless while they are happening, yet become priceless once they are gone. Jennifer completed that morning routine. She drove her children to school. It was a journey she knew well. The roads were familiar. The route was familiar. The destination was familiar. Nothing about the drive suggested that it would later become one of the most significant moments in the investigation into her disappearance. That is perhaps what makes the case so haunting. The final moments of someone's life are rarely marked by dramatic signs. Most people do not know when they are experiencing something for the last time. The last conversation. The last drive. The last goodbye. The last ordinary morning. Human beings are designed to believe in continuation. We assume there will be another chance. Another conversation. Another day. The future feels guaranteed because most of our lives are built upon that assumption. Jennifer had every reason to believe she would see her children again later that day. The school drop-off was not a farewell. It was a routine. A mother leaving her children in the morning with the expectation that she would return. After dropping them off, Jennifer drove back toward her home in New Canaan. According to investigators, this was the last confirmed period when Jennifer was known to be alive. From that moment forward, the timeline becomes the center of a complicated investigation. Every minute matters. Every movement matters. Every piece of information matters. Detectives would eventually work backward from the moment Jennifer was reported missing, attempting to reconstruct what happened between her return home and the moment her absence was discovered. The challenge was immediate. There were no witnesses who could provide a complete account. No one standing nearby could describe what happened after Jennifer entered her house. No neighbor reported seeing a clear confrontation. No emergency call revealed an obvious crisis. Instead, investigators faced the most difficult type of question. What happens inside a private space when nobody else is watching? The home that should have represented safety became the location where detectives believed the most important events occurred. When Jennifer returned home that morning, she was entering a place connected to memories, family, and daily life. It was a place where she had spent countless hours caring for her children and building routines. Yet investigators would later argue that something violent happened there. The transition from normal life to tragedy occurred silently. That silence would become one of the defining characteristics of the case. There was no public disturbance. No dramatic scene witnessed by strangers. No immediate explanation for what had happened. Only absence. As the day continued, people who knew Jennifer began expecting the normal patterns of communication that were part of everyday life. Calls would be made. Messages would be answered. Plans would continue. But Jennifer did not respond. At first, a missed communication may seem harmless. People become busy. Phones run out of battery. Schedules change. But Jennifer was not someone who disappeared without explanation, especially when her children and responsibilities were involved. The concern grew because her silence felt unnatural. It did not match the person people knew. The hours after a disappearance often create a strange emotional landscape. Loved ones move between hope and fear, searching for explanations while resisting the possibility of the worst. They look for simple answers because simple answers still allow the world to make sense. Maybe she went somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe she needed time alone. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But eventually, those explanations begin to collapse under the weight of reality. Jennifer was missing. And someone needed to find out why. As investigators began examining the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, they quickly recognized that the case was different from a typical missing person investigation. Jennifer had not simply left behind an abandoned vehicle or an unanswered phone call. There were signs suggesting that something far more serious had occurred. Her vehicle was found at her home. Her personal belongings remained behind. The circumstances did not suggest someone leaving voluntarily. Instead, they suggested an interruption. A sudden break in the life she had carefully built. The investigation was about to move from concern to urgency. The question was no longer where Jennifer had gone. The question was whether she had been taken. And if she had been taken, who had been close enough, trusted enough, and determined enough to make it happen? Those questions would lead investigators into a world of forensic evidence, surveillance footage, digital records, and hidden movements. But before the evidence could reveal a story, there was only a family waiting for Jennifer to come home. A family that still hoped this was a misunderstanding. A family that did not yet know they were standing at the beginning of one of Connecticut's most complex criminal investigations. Because on that Friday morning, Jennifer Dulos left home expecting to return. She never did. The first hours after Jennifer Dulos failed to return were filled with the kind of uncertainty that can feel almost unbearable. There is a particular kind of fear that comes when someone disappears without explanation. It is not the immediate certainty of tragedy. It is the slow realization that something does not fit. At first, the mind searches for ordinary answers. Maybe she was delayed. Maybe her phone was not working. Maybe plans changed. Maybe there was a simple explanation waiting just beyond the next phone call. Those possibilities are comforting because they allow people to believe the world is still predictable. But as time passed, those explanations became harder to accept. Jennifer was a mother of 5 children. Her daily life revolved around responsibility and routine. She was someone whose absence would immediately affect the lives of others. There were children who depended on her. Friends who expected to hear from her. A network of people who knew her habits well enough to recognize when something felt wrong. And something felt wrong. The concern surrounding Jennifer did not come from one dramatic moment. It came from the accumulation of small details. A call that went unanswered. A message with no response. A routine that suddenly stopped. A person who was expected to be somewhere, but was not. Missing person cases often begin with these small disruptions. There is rarely a clear moment when everyone knows exactly what has happened. Instead, there is a gradual shift from confusion to alarm. The ordinary becomes suspicious. The familiar becomes frightening. The absence becomes evidence. By the time authorities became involved, investigators were already facing a troubling reality. Jennifer had not simply vanished into the outside world. She had left behind a pattern of unanswered questions that suggested she had not chosen to disappear. Her vehicle was located at her New Canaan home. That detail immediately became significant. A vehicle is more than transportation. It often represents movement, independence, and intention. When someone disappears but their vehicle remains behind, investigators must consider what that means. Did the person leave voluntarily? Did someone else move the vehicle? Was it abandoned? Was it staged? Every possibility must be examined. Nothing can be assumed. Inside the home, investigators began looking for signs that could explain what had happened after Jennifer returned from dropping her children off at school. The search for answers would eventually transform familiar spaces into forensic locations. A garage. A driveway. Rooms that had once been part of daily family life. Places that had held ordinary memories now became places where investigators searched for extraordinary evidence. This transformation is one of the most difficult parts of violent crime investigations. A home is supposed to be a place of safety. It is where people relax after stressful days. It is where families create memories. It is where children expect to feel protected. When investigators enter that space looking for evidence of violence, the emotional impact extends far beyond the physical scene. A house becomes a question. Every object becomes a possibility. Every surface becomes something that must be examined. The garage would soon become the focus of that examination. At first glance, a garage may seem like an unremarkable part of any suburban home. A place for vehicles, storage boxes, tools, and everyday clutter. It is rarely the center of family memories. It is usually overlooked. But investigators do not overlook anything. They look at what is present. They look at what is missing. They look at what appears different. According to investigators, the garage contained evidence suggesting that a violent event had occurred there. Blood evidence was discovered, and forensic testing later confirmed that it belonged to Jennifer. That discovery changed the nature of the investigation. A missing person case became a suspected homicide. The difference between those two investigations is enormous. A missing person investigation begins with the assumption that the person may still be alive and needs to be located. A homicide investigation begins with a different question. Who caused this? The discovery of blood created a disturbing possibility. Jennifer had not simply left home and disappeared. Something had happened inside a place connected to her everyday life. The amount and location of the blood evidence suggested investigators were not looking at a minor injury. They believed it indicated severe violence, something inconsistent with an accident or voluntary disappearance. The garage was no longer just a room in a house. It had become the beginning of a timeline. A place where investigators believed the final moments of Jennifer's life may have unfolded. But even with that discovery, one enormous question remained. Where was Jennifer? Evidence could suggest violence. It could suggest a struggle. It could suggest someone had attempted to remove traces of what happened. But evidence could not immediately reveal where the victim had gone. That missing piece would define the entire investigation. The absence of a body created a challenge unlike many homicide cases. There was no location where detectives could recover additional evidence. No autopsy that could establish exact details. No final physical confirmation that could provide a complete picture. Instead, investigators had to reconstruct the crime through fragments. The garage became one fragment. The timeline became another. The digital records became another. The people closest to Jennifer became another. Every piece had to be examined carefully. As investigators worked through those early hours and days, public attention began to grow. A mother of 5 had disappeared from a quiet Connecticut community. The circumstances were alarming. The questions were immediate. People wanted answers. But answers would not come quickly. Complex investigations rarely move in straight lines. They move through uncertainty. Detectives follow leads that fail. They examine possibilities that turn out to be wrong. They return to evidence again and again, looking for details that may have been missed the first time. The public often sees only the dramatic moments, the arrests, the courtroom arguments, the major discoveries. Behind those moments are countless hours of quiet work. Interviewing witnesses. Reviewing records. Analyzing data. Waiting for laboratory results. Trying to understand the final movements of someone who can no longer explain them. For Jennifer's family, those first days must have been filled with an impossible combination of emotions. Fear that something terrible had happened. Hope that she might still return. Anger that anyone could have placed them in such a situation. Confusion about how a normal morning could transform into a nightmare. The search for Jennifer was no longer simply about finding a missing person. It had become a search for truth. And truth would require investigators to look beyond the surface of a quiet neighborhood and into the hidden movements of the people connected to Jennifer's final hours. Because somewhere between the moment Jennifer returned home and the moment her disappearance was discovered, someone knew what happened. Someone had information. Someone had made choices. The investigation would now focus on uncovering those choices, tracing movements, and identifying the person or people responsible for turning an ordinary Friday into a tragedy that would capture national attention. The evidence had begun speaking. But it had not yet told the entire story. As investigators continued examining the events of May 24, 2019, one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. Jennifer Dulos had not simply disappeared. Something had happened inside her home. The challenge was discovering exactly what. In the earliest stages of a homicide investigation, detectives are forced to work inside a world of uncertainty. They do not begin with a complete story. They begin with fragments. A piece of information from one person. A physical detail from a location. A digital record from a device. A timeline that seems incomplete. Their task is to transform fragments into facts. And in Jennifer's case, every fragment carried enormous weight because the most important piece of evidence was missing. Jennifer herself. Without her remains, investigators could not follow the traditional path used in many homicide cases. There was no autopsy report describing injuries. No official time of death established by medical examination. No final location where the victim could be studied and understood. Instead, they had to reconstruct the final hours of her life through everything left behind. The home became a silent witness. The garage became a critical location. The evidence inside those spaces suggested that someone had attempted to alter the scene after something violent occurred. That detail was particularly important. Investigators are trained to distinguish between a scene where something happened naturally and a scene where someone tried to control what others would discover afterward. A broken object may happen by accident. A misplaced item may be meaningless. But cleaning, removing, or relocating evidence suggests a different type of behavior. It suggests awareness. It suggests someone understood that certain things needed to disappear. The investigators examining Jennifer's home believed they were not looking at the aftermath of an accident. They believed they were looking at the aftermath of an intentional act. The discovery of blood evidence was only the beginning. Forensic specialists examined the scene carefully, searching for patterns that could reveal movement and sequence. Blood does not simply indicate that an injury occurred. Under certain circumstances, it can provide information about what happened afterward. Was someone standing in a particular area? Was something moved? Was the scene altered? Was an attempt made to remove traces? Every detail mattered. Because the person responsible had left investigators with a difficult challenge. They had removed the victim. But they had not removed everything. That is the paradox of criminal investigations. People who commit crimes often believe they can control the story afterward. They believe that if they remove enough evidence, the truth becomes impossible to discover. But evidence does not need to be complete to be powerful. A single fingerprint may not tell an entire story. A single camera image may not reveal every event. A single digital record may not explain every decision. But when independent pieces point in the same direction, they become difficult to dismiss. The investigation into Jennifer's disappearance would eventually become a case built on connections. Connections between places. Connections between movements. Connections between people. Connections between decisions made before and after she vanished. The first major challenge for investigators was establishing a timeline. Timelines are the backbone of complex criminal cases. They answer basic but crucial questions. Where was someone at a specific moment? What did they do afterward? How long did it take them to move from one place to another? Did their actions match their statements? A timeline can reveal contradictions that people never intended to expose. It can show that a person was somewhere they claimed not to be. It can demonstrate that certain events could not have happened as described. In Jennifer's case, investigators began collecting information from multiple sources. Phone records, electronic data, surveillance footage, vehicle information, witness statements. Each source provided only part of the picture. But together, they began creating a sequence. A sequence that prosecutors would later argue showed planning and an attempt to conceal a crime. One of the most important elements of the investigation involved understanding the relationship between Jennifer and the people closest to her. In many missing person cases, the first questions investigators ask involve the victim's personal life. Who knew the victim's routine? Who had access to the victim's home? Who had a reason to want the victim gone? Who might benefit from the disappearance? These questions are not accusations. They are investigative tools. The people closest to a victim are often the ones who can provide the most important information. They know habits. They know schedules. They know conflicts. They know the details that strangers would never understand. But they may also be the people investigators need to examine most carefully. That reality creates one of the most difficult aspects of homicide investigations. The people who should be trusted most may also become the focus of suspicion. For Jennifer's family and friends, this process would be deeply painful. They were searching for someone they loved while watching investigators examine the relationships surrounding her. Every question asked by detectives carried emotional weight. Every possibility considered created another layer of fear. Yet investigators had a responsibility to follow the evidence wherever it led. The investigation could not be guided by emotion. It had to be guided by facts. As detectives continued their work, attention increasingly focused on Jennifer's estranged husband, Fotis Dulos. The history between Jennifer and Fotis became a central part of understanding the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Their divorce had been ongoing. Their custody dispute had created significant tension. Their relationship had changed from marriage partners to legal opponents. Investigators began examining whether that conflict could provide insight into what happened. Again, suspicion was not proof. A difficult relationship does not automatically explain a crime. But motive is one piece of the puzzle investigators must consider. Why would someone commit an act of violence? What would they hope to gain? What pressures or circumstances might have influenced their decisions? Those questions would become central as the investigation moved forward. At the same time, detectives continued following physical evidence. They searched locations connected to Jennifer. They examined records. They reviewed footage. They attempted to locate any information that could answer the question that remained at the center of everything. Where was Jennifer? The search expanded beyond the home. Teams looked through areas where evidence might have been left. Investigators followed leads that offered possible explanations. Some produced information. Others ended without answers. The public often imagines investigations as a straight path from discovery to solution. Reality is different. It is a maze. Detectives enter paths that lead nowhere. They revisit assumptions. They question information they once believed was reliable. They continue because the alternative is accepting uncertainty. And for Jennifer's family, uncertainty was unbearable. The case was no longer only about determining what happened. It was about finding Jennifer. Finding the person who had disappeared. Finding a place where her family could finally say goodbye. But as investigators would soon discover, the person who might have held the most important answers was also someone whose own actions were beginning to attract intense scrutiny. The investigation was moving toward its first major confrontation. The quiet suburban mystery was becoming a criminal case. And the evidence collected in those early days would soon lead authorities toward the people they believed were responsible for turning Jennifer's disappearance into a carefully concealed tragedy. The discovery inside Jennifer Dulo's home changed everything. Before that moment, the case existed in a space between fear and hope. A woman had disappeared. Her family wanted answers. Investigators needed to understand what had happened. But as long as there was no clear evidence of violence, the possibility remained that Jennifer might still be found alive. Then the evidence inside the garage told a different story. The quiet suburban home in New Canaan was no longer simply the last place Jennifer had been seen. It had become the place where investigators believed her life may have ended. For the detectives who entered the property, the scene presented a difficult contradiction. From the outside, nothing about the neighborhood suggested danger. The streets remained calm. The surrounding homes stood exactly as they had for years. Trees moved gently in the spring breeze. Cars passed through the area as residents continued with their daily routines. But inside the property, investigators were confronted with signs that something deeply disturbing had occurred. This contrast would become one of the defining images of the case. A peaceful community. A quiet home. And beneath that surface, evidence of violence. Crime scenes rarely resemble the dramatic images people imagine from television. They are often ordinary places where extraordinary events leave behind small traces. A kitchen. A bedroom. A garage. A vehicle. Locations that normally carry no meaning suddenly become the center of an investigation. The garage at Jennifer's home became one of those places. To an average person, a garage is rarely memorable. It is a functional space. A place where people park cars, store tools, keep boxes, and temporarily place items they may not need every day. But to forensic investigators, every space tells a story. The position of objects. The condition of surfaces. The presence or absence of certain materials. The smallest irregularities can become important. Investigators began examining the garage with the understanding that they were not simply searching for evidence of what happened. They were searching for evidence of what someone attempted to hide. According to authorities, blood evidence was discovered inside the garage. Laboratory analysis later confirmed that the blood belonged to Jennifer. That single discovery transformed the investigation. The question was no longer whether Jennifer had chosen to leave. The evidence suggested she had not. The possibility of a voluntary disappearance became increasingly difficult to support. A person planning to leave a life behind would typically take certain steps. They might bring personal belongings. They might contact someone. They might create some indication of their intentions. Jennifer had not done those things. Instead, investigators found evidence consistent with violence. The blood evidence carried another disturbing implication. The amount and location of the blood suggested that the injuries Jennifer suffered were extremely serious. Investigators believed the evidence indicated a violent attack rather than an accident or minor incident. Yet even with that discovery, the case contained a painful contradiction. There was evidence that something terrible had happened. But there was no Jennifer. No body. No final resting place. No physical answer for a family desperate to know what had happened to her. This absence became the central challenge of the investigation. In many homicide cases, the victim's remains provide investigators with critical information. Medical examination can reveal cause of death, timing, and sometimes details about what occurred. Physical evidence from the location where a body is found can help reconstruct the final moments. Jennifer's case offered none of those traditional answers. Instead, investigators had to rely on what remained. And what remained was significant. The garage appeared to contain signs that someone had attempted to clean or alter the area after the violence occurred. To investigators, this suggested an effort to remove evidence and prevent the discovery of what had happened. This behavior became a major focus. Because cleaning a crime scene is not simply about removing physical traces. It is about controlling a narrative. A person who attempts to clean a scene is making a decision. They are not merely reacting to events. They are taking action afterward. They are thinking about discovery, consequences, and what others might find. That mindset would become important as detectives examined the timeline following Jennifer's disappearance. Who had access to the home? Who knew Jennifer's schedule? Who had the opportunity to enter the property? Who could have removed evidence? Every question narrowed the investigation. Every answer created new questions. The garage also represented something emotionally significant. This was not an abandoned location. It was part of Jennifer's home. A place connected to her children. A place connected to everyday family life. That reality made the discovery even more painful for those who knew her. A home is supposed to protect the people inside it. It is supposed to represent comfort and security. The possibility that it had become the location of a violent crime was difficult to comprehend. For Jennifer's loved ones, the discovery likely brought a devastating shift. Before the evidence was found, there was still uncertainty. Afterward, uncertainty became fear. The hope that Jennifer might simply return began to fade. The investigation was no longer searching only for a missing mother. It was searching for the truth behind a suspected murder. As detectives continued processing the scene, they understood that the garage might hold only part of the answer. A crime scene does not end at the location where violence occurs. Evidence moves. People move. Vehicles move. Digital records continue creating a trail long after human actions are finished. The next question became unavoidable. If Jennifer had been harmed inside the home, what happened afterward? Someone had to move. Someone had to make decisions. Someone had to leave the property. Someone had to attempt to erase what occurred. That meant investigators needed to look beyond the walls of Jennifer's house. They needed to follow the trail outward. The investigation would soon expand into a complex network of surveillance footage, phone records, vehicle data, and discarded evidence. What initially appeared to be a disappearance inside a quiet Connecticut neighborhood would become a reconstruction of movements across multiple locations. The garage provided the first major piece of the puzzle. But it was only the beginning. Because the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Jennifer? And who had tried so desperately to make sure no one would ever find out? The discovery of blood inside Jennifer Dulow's garage created a turning point, but investigators understood immediately that blood alone could not tell the entire story. Blood could establish that violence had occurred. It could establish that Jennifer had been inside the garage and suffered serious injuries. But it could not answer every question. It could not reveal who was responsible. It could not reveal where Jennifer had been taken. It could not explain every movement that happened after that moment. For those answers, investigators needed to look beyond the garage. They needed to follow the trail. Every criminal investigation is, in many ways, an attempt to reconstruct a story that someone tried to interrupt. The person responsible may remove objects, change locations, or create confusion, but human actions almost always leave traces behind. A vehicle travels through public spaces. A phone connects to towers. A camera records movement. A person communicates with another person. The modern world remembers far more than people realize. That would become especially important in Jennifer's case. As investigators expanded their search, they began examining every possible source of information surrounding the hours after Jennifer disappeared. They reviewed digital records and physical evidence, attempting to create a timeline precise enough to answer the most basic question. What happened after Jennifer returned home? The answer would depend on hundreds of small details. A phone signal. A vehicle movement. A surveillance image. A piece of discarded material. A statement that matched or failed to match the evidence. The challenge was not finding information. The challenge was understanding what information meant. A single data point rarely tells a complete story. A vehicle appearing on a camera does not automatically prove why it was there. A person being near a location does not automatically prove what happened. Investigators must connect evidence through logic, science, and context. That process takes time. And in Jennifer's case, time was something everyone desperately wanted. The first priority remained finding Jennifer. Search efforts expanded as authorities examined possible locations and followed leads. Investigators looked through areas where evidence might have been left or where someone might have attempted to conceal what happened. Teams searched different environments, understanding that every possible location had to be considered. The absence of Jennifer's body made every search both urgent and heartbreaking. A discovery could provide answers. But every unsuccessful search brought another wave of disappointment. For families of missing people, searching is emotionally exhausting because every moment contains two competing possibilities. The possibility of finding their loved one. And the possibility that what they find will confirm their greatest fear. Jennifer's family faced that unbearable uncertainty. While investigators worked methodically, the public began focusing on the people closest to Jennifer. In missing person cases, attention naturally turns toward relationships because those relationships often hold important information about a person's life. Who knew their routine? Who had access? Who had conflict with them? Who might have information they had not shared? Jennifer's relationship with her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos, became a central focus. The circumstances surrounding their divorce were already known to authorities. Their separation had involved significant legal conflict, particularly regarding custody of their children. Investigators examined whether those disputes could provide insight into what happened. The history between two people can reveal context. But context is not proof. A difficult divorce does not automatically explain a disappearance. A disagreement does not automatically lead to violence. Investigators had to separate emotional history from evidence. That distinction would become critical as the case developed. The investigation required answers that could survive outside public opinion. It required facts. And facts began emerging from unexpected places. One of the most significant developments involved surveillance footage from Hartford. Away from the quiet streets of New Canaan, cameras captured movements that investigators believed were connected to the aftermath of Jennifer's disappearance. The footage showed Fotis Dulos and his girlfriend, Michelle Traconis, traveling through the city. At first glance, a vehicle moving through Hartford might seem ordinary. Thousands of vehicles travel through the city every day. People drive to work. They run errands. They visit friends. They go home. But investigators were not examining the footage as an isolated image. They were comparing it with other evidence. The timing. The route. The actions captured on camera. Together, these details began forming a picture. According to authorities, the footage showed the pair stopping at multiple locations and discarding items into public trash containers. This behavior became one of the most important elements of the investigation. Because investigators believed those discarded materials were not random household trash. They believed they were connected to an attempt to destroy evidence. The recovery of those items provided another significant shift in the case. Among the materials investigators collected were items they said included clothing with blood evidence, cleaning materials, gloves, and other objects that appeared connected to the effort to conceal what had happened. Laboratory testing would become essential. Physical evidence must be carefully analyzed before investigators can understand its significance. The presence of an object alone does not establish guilt. Scientists must determine what the object contains, how it connects to individuals, and whether the findings support the larger timeline. In Jennifer's case, investigators believed the evidence from those discarded materials strengthened the theory that someone had attempted to remove traces of a crime. The investigation was becoming a reconstruction of two opposing actions. One side attempted to erase. The other side attempted to recover. One side moved objects away from the scene. The other side collected them. One side hoped time would destroy evidence. The other side understood that evidence often survives. This conflict between concealment and discovery would define much of the investigation. Every item recovered from a trash bin represented another piece of information. A glove was no longer just a glove. Clothing was no longer just clothing. Cleaning supplies were no longer ordinary household objects. Their meaning depended on the circumstances surrounding them. A person can change a location. They can move objects. They can attempt to create distance between themselves and an event. But they cannot easily erase every connection. The evidence trail was beginning to point toward a larger sequence of events. Investigators believed Jennifer was attacked inside her home. They believed someone then attempted to clean the scene. They believed someone transported evidence away from the location. And they believed the people involved had made choices that left behind a pattern. Still, the central mystery remained. Where was Jennifer? The discarded evidence answered some questions. It raised others. It suggested preparation. It suggested awareness. It suggested an effort to prevent investigators from discovering the truth. But it did not provide the one thing Jennifer's family wanted most: her location. As detectives continued following the trail, they moved deeper into the personal relationships surrounding Jennifer. The investigation would soon focus not only on physical evidence, but also on planning, communication, and the actions of those accused of helping conceal what happened. The quiet disappearance of a Connecticut mother was becoming a complex criminal case built from hundreds of fragments. And investigators were about to discover that the most important clues were not hidden in one place. They were scattered across an entire timeline.